Before we begin, drop a comment below with your country and what time it is right now where you're watching. Whether it's sunrise in Tokyo, midnight in Lagos, afternoon in Toronto, or evening in London, I want to know. Don't just sit back. Tell me where in the world you are. Now, let's dive into the story. A billionaire sat alone in a courtroom at 4:47 p.m. on a Tuesday afternoon, and his $15,000 suit was wrinkled for the first time in 30 years. Donovan Sterling stared at the empty chair beside him, the chair where his lawyer should have been sitting, and felt something he hadn't felt since he was a kid growing up in a two-bedroom apartment in Detroit. Pure, undiluted fear. The trial would resume in 13 minutes. The prosecutor across the aisle had documents that would destroy him. His phone screen glowed with 47 missed calls from his children, but he couldn't answer them because he knew exactly why they were calling. They weren't calling to support him. They were calling to gloat about his downfall. And then, while he sat there drowning in the wreckage of his life, a janitor pushing a mop bucket looked him dead in the eye and said 4 words that would change both their lives forever. "I will help you." The fluorescent lights in courtroom 7B hummed with a frequency that made Donovan's teeth ache. He sat at the defense table with his hands flat against the mahogany surface, trying to stop them from shaking, but they trembled anyway like leaves in a windstorm he couldn't control. Papers were scattered in front of him, depositions, exhibits, motions he didn't understand, and every single one of them felt like a nail being hammered into his coffin. The clock on the wall ticked forward with mechanical indifference. 4:48. 12 minutes until Judge Helena Rothman emerged from her chambers and expected him to defend himself against charges of corporate fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. 12 minutes until his entire life collapsed in front of 200 people and a jury of 12 strangers who already believed he was guilty. His mouth was dry, tongue sticking to the roof of his mouth like sandpaper. He'd loosened his tie 20 minutes ago, and now it hung around his neck like a noose that hadn't quite finished its job yet. 58 years old, $4.3 billion in net worth, and nobody in this building would help him. The thought kept circling his mind like a vulture waiting for something to die. How did it come to this? How did a man who'd built an empire from nothing end up sitting alone in a courtroom, abandoned by everyone who'd promised to stand beside him? His phone buzzed again on the table. Call number 48. His daughter, Rebecca. He watched her name flash on the screen and felt his stomach twist. She wasn't calling because she cared. She was calling because Victor Langford had gotten to her first, had poisoned her against him, had promised her a slice of the company once her father was rotting in prison. Donovan let it go to voicemail. He couldn't bear to hear the satisfaction in her voice. Instead, he grabbed his phone with shaking fingers and pulled up Richard Caldwell's number for the 16th time in the last hour. Caldwell was his lead defense attorney. Was. Past tense. Because this morning at 8 a.m., Caldwell had filed a formal withdrawal from the case, and Donovan hadn't found out until 30 minutes ago when the court clerk handed him a copy of the motion with an expression that said she'd already written his obituary. The phone rang 4 times before a secretary picked up, her voice professionally detached. Caldwell and Associates. Donovan's voice cracked when he spoke. "This is Donovan Sterling. I need to speak to Richard immediately." Silence. Then, delivered with the emotional weight of someone reading a grocery list, "Mr. Caldwell is no longer representing you, Mr. Sterling. He withdrew from your case this morning. Didn't he tell you?" The line went dead. Donovan stared at the phone in his hand like it was a foreign object. "Didn't he tell you?" No. Richard Caldwell had not told him. Richard Caldwell had accepted $300,000 in legal fees, had spent 6 months preparing his defense, had looked him in the eye 3 days ago and said, "We've got this, Don. Trust me." And then he'd vanished like smoke. Donovan's eyes drifted across the aisle to where the lead prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Catherine Voss, sat reviewing her notes with the quiet confidence of someone holding 4 aces. She glanced up, caught his gaze, and smiled. It was the smile of a predator who just watched its prey stumble. Panic set in then, real and visceral, crawling up his spine like ice water. Donovan grabbed his phone again and started calling every attorney he knew. Marcus Finn, the corporate lawyer who'd handled his merger deals. "I'm sorry, Donovan, but I have a conflict of interest. I can't take your case." Patricia Zhou, the defense attorney who'd gotten his CFO off on insider trading charges. My firm's already representing another party in this matter. My hands are tied. David Okonkwo, the civil rights lawyer he donated $2 million to last year. Don, I wish I could help, but I'm conflicted out. I'm so sorry. Conflicted out. Every single one of them. It wasn't a coincidence. Victor Langford had spent the last 6 months making sure that every competent attorney in the city was either paid off or legally prevented from representing him. The trap had been built slowly, carefully, and Donovan had walked right into it. A clerk appeared in the doorway, a young man with wire-rimmed glasses and an apologetic expression. Mr. Sterling, Judge Rothman asked me to inform you that trial resumes in 11 minutes. With or without counsel. Donovan's throat closed up. I'm trying to find. I understand, sir. But the judge was very clear. 11 minutes. The clerk disappeared. Sweat beaded on Donovan's forehead. The courtroom wall seemed to press inward, the ceiling dropping lower, the air thinning until each breath felt like work. His heart hammered against his ribs in a rhythm that whispered, "You're going to lose, you're going to lose, you're going to lose." And then he heard Sarah's voice, clear as if she were standing right beside him. His wife, dead 3 years now from the cancer that had eaten her alive in 6 brutal months. Her last words to him, whispered in a hospital room that smelled of antiseptic and death. "Promise me you'll never give up. Promise me." He'd promised. But what the hell was he supposed to do now? The courtroom door opened with a soft creak, and Donovan barely registered it. He was too busy staring at the papers in front of him, trying to make sense of legal language that might as well have been written in ancient Greek. Footsteps approached. The soft squeak of rubber wheels on polished wood. The subtle smell of industrial cleaner and lemon disinfectant. A janitor pushed a yellow mop bucket past the gallery, moving with the unhurried efficiency of someone who'd performed the same task 10,000 times. Donovan glanced up for half a second and saw a black man in his late 40s, wearing a worn navy blue uniform with a name tag that read Marcus. The janitor didn't look at him, just pushed his cart toward the corner where the bailiff station stood, parking it beside the water cooler. But then he stopped, turned, and studied the scattered documents on Donovan's table with an intensity that didn't match his role. His eyes moved quickly across the papers, pausing on exhibit numbers, case citations, dates. It lasted maybe 10 seconds. Then the janitor's gaze lifted and locked onto Donovan's face. There was something in those eyes. Not pity, not curiosity, something sharper. Recognition, maybe, or assessment. The kind of look a chess player gives the board before making a move that will change the entire game. Donovan felt a flicker of something, but he couldn't name it and didn't have time to care. He turned back to his phone, scrolling through his contacts desperately, looking for anyone who might pick up, anyone who might save him. The janitor's voice cut through the silence like a blade. "I will help you." 4 words. Simple. Direct. Donovan's head snapped up. The janitor stood 5 feet away now, hands resting calmly on the handle of his mop. His expression was steady, certain, completely absent of doubt. For a moment, Donovan could only stare. Then reality crashed back. "You're a janitor." It came out harsher than he meant, but the absurdity of the moment was too much. His life was ending in 10 minutes, and a custodian was offering to help. The janitor didn't flinch. "I'm a janitor who's been cleaning this courthouse for 15 years. I know more law than most of the attorneys who walk these halls, and I know exactly why your lawyer abandoned you." Donovan's breath caught. "What?" Richard Caldwell took $5 million from Victor Langford 6 months ago. The payment went through a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands. He's been feeding your defense strategy to the prosecution since day one. This morning, he got his final payment. 2 million more. Then he walked. The words hit like physical blows. Donovan's mind spun. "How do you?" A gavel echoed from somewhere in the building. Sharp. Final. The judge's chambers. The janitor's eyes didn't leave Donovan's face. "You have 2 choices. You can sit here alone and let them destroy you. Or you can trust me." "You're a janitor," Donovan repeated, but this time it sounded less like an accusation and more like a plea for this to make sense. "You can't represent me in court. You're not a lawyer." "No," the janitor said quietly, "but you can represent yourself, and I can sit beside you as a legal advisor. It's your right under the Sixth Amendment. The judge has to allow it. Somewhere in the hallway, footsteps approached. Heavy. Official. The bailiff returning to call the court to order. 5 minutes left. Maybe less. Donovan looked at the stranger, this janitor with calloused hands and sharp eyes, and felt the weight of an impossible decision crushing down on him. Trust a man he'd never met, or face Catherine Voss alone, and watch everything he built burn to ash. The janitor extended his hand. My name is Marcus Webb, and if you let me, I'm going to save your life. If you've ever felt abandoned when you needed someone most, if you've ever been let down by someone you trusted with everything, don't scroll past the story. This is just the beginning. And if you don't hit that subscribe button right now, you're going to miss the moment when everything changes. When this video ends and you can't find it again, don't come to the comments asking where the rest of the story is. Subscribe to Olivia the Storyteller now, or spend the next hour wondering what you missed. Your choice. Donovan stared at that extended hand like it was both a lifeline and a trap. Every logical bone in his body screamed that this was insane. You don't trust your freedom to a janitor. You don't bet your entire future on a stranger who pushes a mop for a living. But logic had abandoned him the same way Richard Caldwell had, and desperation makes people do things they'd never consider in the clear light of normal circumstances. Marcus Webb's hand remained steady, waiting. And in that moment, Donovan realized something that cut through his panic like a knife through fog. He had absolutely nothing left to lose. Everything was already gone. His lawyer had betrayed him. His children had turned against him. His former best friend had orchestrated his destruction. The prosecutors had evidence that would bury him for 20 years. What did he have left to protect by saying no? His dignity, his reputation, those were already bleeding out on the courtroom floor. So Donovan Sterling, a man who'd built a $4 billion empire on calculated risks and careful decisions, made the most reckless choice of his entire life. He reached out and gripped Marcus Webb's hand. The janitor's palm was rough with calluses, the hand of someone who'd spent decades doing physical labor that left permanent marks. But his grip was firm, steady, and somehow that steadiness transferred through skin and bone and made Donovan's racing heart slow down just enough to think clearly for the first time in an hour. Marcus pulled a small notepad from his uniform pocket, the kind you'd buy at a dollar store, and flipped it open to reveal pages covered in tight, precise handwriting. Legal citations, case numbers, procedural rules. It looked like something a law student would carry, not a courthouse custodian. He glanced at the scattered documents on Donovan's table, his eyes moving with the speed of someone who'd spent years training themselves to absorb information quickly. Then he looked up at Donovan and spoke in a voice that was quiet but carried absolute authority. First thing you need to know, Catherine Voss, the prosecutor, has built her entire case on 3 pillars. Financial records showing suspicious transfers, emails allegedly sent from your account, and witness testimony from former employees. All 3 pillars are compromised. The financial records were doctored by a forensic accountant named Gerald Tisch, who received a $200,000 consulting contract from one of Langford's shell companies 3 weeks after the indictment. The emails were backdated by an IT expert named Ryan Kowalski, who works for a firm that gets 80% of its revenue from Langford's business network. And the witnesses. Marcus tapped one of the documents. Every single one of them has received money, job offers, or had legal problems mysteriously disappear in the last 6 months. This isn't a prosecution. It's a performance. Donovan felt his mouth go dry for a different reason now. How do you know all this? Marcus's expression didn't change. Because I clean their offices. I empty their trash cans. I wipe down their desks. And people don't notice janitors, Mr. Sterling. They leave documents face up. They have conversations on speakerphone. They throw away drafts of emails they think nobody will ever read. For 15 years, I've been invisible in this building. And invisible people see everything. The bailiff's voice boomed from the doorway. All rise. The Honorable Judge Helena Rothman presiding. The words hit like a starting gun. Marcus moved fast, scooping up the scattered papers and organizing them into neat stacks with practiced efficiency. He grabbed a legal pad from his cleaning cart, along with 2 pens that looked suspiciously expensive for someone earning janitor wages. Then he positioned himself in the chair beside Donovan, sitting with the posture of someone who belonged there, and suddenly he didn't look like a custodian anymore. He looked like exactly what he was pretending to be, a legal advisor who knew what he was doing. Judge Helena Rothman entered through the door behind the bench, her black robes flowing around her like a cape of authority. She was in her early 60s, with silver hair pulled back in a severe bun and eyes that missed absolutely nothing. Those eyes swept across the courtroom, pausing on the gallery where a handful of reporters sat with notebooks ready, then moving to the prosecution table where Catherine Voss sat with her team looking confident and prepared, and finally landing on the defense table where Donovan sat beside a man in a janitor's uniform. Judge Rothman's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Recognition, maybe, or surprise. She settled into her chair and picked up a document from her desk, reading it quickly before looking directly at Donovan. Mr. Sterling, I received notice this morning that your attorney, Richard Caldwell, has withdrawn from your case. I assume you've secured new representation. Donovan stood, his legs feeling steadier than they had any right to. Your Honor, I'll be representing myself. This is Marcus Webb, my legal advisor. The courtroom erupted, not in shouting or chaos, but in a wave of whispers that rolled through the gallery like wind through tall grass. Catherine Voss shot to her feet, her face flushing with something between outrage and disbelief. Your Honor, this is absurd. The defendant can't seriously expect to defend himself against federal charges with a courthouse janitor sitting beside him. This is a mockery of the judicial process. Judge Rothman's gaze shifted to Marcus, and for a long moment she simply studied him. Then something extraordinary happened. Her expression softened, just slightly, and she said, Mr. Webb, I've seen you in this building for quite some time. You're here every day, aren't you? Marcus stood, his voice respectful but not subservient. Yes, Your Honor. 15 years. And during those 15 years, I've noticed you reading legal texts, case files, discarded briefs from the recycling bins. The courtroom went silent. Even Catherine Voss closed her mouth, suddenly uncertain. Judge Rothman leaned forward slightly. I've also noticed that you have an unusual habit of pausing outside courtrooms when interesting cases are being argued. You listen. You take notes. And if I'm not mistaken, you've educated yourself to a degree that would surprise most people in this building. Marcus met her eyes steadily. I was 3 months away from finishing law school 16 years ago, Your Honor. Life had other plans. But I never stopped studying. The judge nodded slowly, then turned her attention back to Donovan. Mr. Sterling, you have a constitutional right to represent yourself, and you have the right to employ any advisor you choose, regardless of their professional credentials. However, I want to be crystal clear about something. This trial will proceed under the same standards and rules as if you had the finest legal team in the country. Mr. Webb can advise you, but he cannot speak on your behalf. You will be the one addressing this court. Do you understand? Donovan felt Marcus's hand touch his elbow briefly, a gesture of reassurance. I understand, Your Honor. Very well. Judge Rothman picked up her gavel. Ms. Voss, you may begin your opening statement. Catherine Voss stood and buttoned her blazer with sharp, angry movements. She was furious, Donovan realized. She'd expected to walk into this courtroom and face a broken man with no defense. Instead, she was facing something she hadn't prepared for, and prosecutors hate surprises. She approached the jury box with her notes in hand, but Donovan could see that her rhythm was off, her confidence shaken. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, she began, the evidence will show that Donovan Sterling systematically defrauded his own company and its shareholders of over $300 million. He created shell companies to hide the transfers. He falsified financial records to cover his tracks. And he used his position of power and trust to enrich himself at the expense of thousands of employees and investors who believed in him. She went on for 12 minutes, laying out the prosecution's case with practiced precision. But Donovan wasn't really listening anymore. He was watching Marcus, who was writing notes in small, precise handwriting, occasionally underlining something or drawing arrows connecting different points. At one point, Marcus leaned close and whispered, "She just made a mistake. She claimed the transfers happened in March of last year. But the shell companies she's referencing weren't incorporated until May. She's using documents that don't match her own timeline." Donovan felt a spark of something he hadn't felt in months. Hope. Not the desperate, clawing hope of a drowning man grabbing at driftwood. Real hope. The kind that comes from having someone competent beside you who actually knows what they're doing. When Catherine Voss finished and returned to her table, Judge Rothman turned to Donovan. Mr. Sterling, you may present your opening statement. This was it, the moment that would set the tone for everything that followed. Donovan stood on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. He'd given 1,000 presentations in his life, pitched to investors, addressed shareholders, spoken at conferences in front of audiences of thousands. But standing in front of 12 strangers who held his freedom in their hands was different. He could feel their eyes on him, judging, assessing, already half convinced by the prosecutor's smooth words. Marcus had written something on the legal pad and turned it toward him. 3 words. Tell your truth. Donovan took a breath and spoke. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Donovan Sterling. I'm 58 years old. I've built companies. I've employed thousands of people. I've made billions of dollars. And this morning, the man I paid $300,000 to defend me abandoned me in the middle of this trial without even having the courage to tell me to my face. He saw several jurors sit up straighter. Good. He had their attention. I'm not a lawyer. I don't know all the procedural rules or the fancy legal language. But I know one thing with absolute certainty. I did not commit the crimes I'm accused of. And over the next few days, I'm going to prove to you that everything you just heard from the prosecution is built on lies, manufactured evidence, and testimony from people who were paid to destroy me. His voice grew steadier as he spoke. The real criminal in this story is sitting in the gallery right now, watching this unfold like it's entertainment. His name is Victor Langford. He was my business partner, my friend, the man who stood beside me as best man at my wedding. And 6 months ago, when I discovered he was engaging in illegal practices that could destroy our company, I told him I was going to expose him. So he decided to destroy me first. Catherine Voss shot to her feet. Objection. Your Honor, this is not an opening statement. It's a conspiracy theory. Judge Rothman considered this for a moment. Mr. Sterling, please confine your remarks to what you intend to prove through evidence. I will prove it, Your Honor. Every word. Donovan looked back at the jury. I'm going to show you bank records, communications, and connections that the prosecution conveniently left out of their case. And by the time we're finished, you're going to understand exactly how an innocent man can be framed when someone with unlimited resources and zero conscience decides to take everything from him. He sat down. His heart was hammering so hard he could hear it in his ears. Had that been good? Bad? He had no idea. But Marcus leaned close and whispered, You just told them a story. That's what juries need. Now we prove it. Judge Rothman checked the clock. We'll take a 15-minute recess. When we return, Ms. Voss, you may call your first witness. The gavel came down. People stood. The room filled with the sound of shuffling papers and quiet conversations. And Donovan Sterling, sitting beside a janitor who'd just become his only ally in a war he was desperately trying to survive, realized that something had shifted. He wasn't drowning anymore. He was fighting. And for the first time in 6 months, he actually believed he might have a chance. Marcus pulled out his notebook again and started writing, his hand moving rapidly across the page. Donovan watched him and asked the question that had been burning in his mind since this impossible partnership began. Why are you doing this? Why are you risking everything to help me? Marcus didn't look up from his writing. Because 16 years ago, when my mother was dying and I had to drop out of law school to take care of her, I made a promise. I promised that if I ever got the chance to use what I'd learned to help someone who truly needed it, I would. You're that chance, Mr. Sterling. And besides, he finally looked up, and there was steel in his eyes. I really hate bullies. And Victor Langford is the worst kind of bully there is. The kind who hides behind money and power while destroying people who can't fight back. So yes, I'm going to help you. Not because you're rich, or because you can pay me. I'm helping you because it's the right thing to do. And because someone needs to prove that the invisible people in this world matter too. Right now, some of you are watching without subscribing, thinking you'll remember to find this channel later. But here's the truth, you won't. Tomorrow, you'll try to search for it, and you'll get frustrated. You'll see Olivia the Storyteller in recommendations and think, wait, wasn't that the channel with that amazing story? But by then, you'll have missed 3 more stories just as powerful as this one. Don't be that person. Hit subscribe now, or leave a comment explaining why you're choosing to miss out. We'll wait. The thing about Marcus Webb that nobody knew, sitting there in that courtroom beside a billionaire who was grasping at his last thread of hope, was that he'd been exactly where Donovan Sterling was now. Not in a courtroom facing prison, but in that specific place where your entire life hinges on a single impossible choice, and there's nobody coming to save you. Marcus knew what it felt like to be abandoned, to watch the people you trusted walk away when you needed them most. And that knowledge, that bone-deep understanding of what it means to stand alone against the world, was exactly why he'd said those 4 words. I will help you. Because 25 years ago, when Marcus Webb needed help, nobody had offered. Nobody had even noticed. Marcus was 22 years old when he enrolled in night law school at the state university. He'd worked 3 years after high school to save enough money for tuition, taking every overtime shift he could get at the custodial company that employed him to clean office buildings downtown. His mother had raised him alone after his father died in a factory accident when Marcus was 7, and she'd done it on a nurse's assistant salary that barely covered rent and groceries in their neighborhood where gunshots were more common than birdsong. She told him every single day of his childhood that education was the only way out, that his mind was a gift, that he was going to do something important with his life. And Marcus believed her. So he studied. He read everything he could get his hands on. He aced every test. And when he got accepted to law school, even though it was just the night program at a state school and not some prestigious institution, his mother cried tears of joy and said, "Baby, you're going to be a lawyer. You're going to help people who can't help themselves." That was the dream. That was the plan. Work custodial jobs during the day to pay tuition, attend classes at night, graduate, pass the bar, and spend his life defending people who the system chewed up and spit out. People like his mother, who'd been denied workers' compensation when she injured her back lifting a patient. People like his neighbors, who got railroaded by public defenders with 100-case loads and no time to actually fight. Marcus was going to be different. He was going to care. And he was brilliant at it. Top of his class from day one. Professors pulled him aside and told him he had a gift for seeing patterns in case law, for connecting precedents that others missed, for understanding the architecture of legal arguments in a way that usually took decades to develop. Then there was Keisha. Beautiful, ambitious Keisha Williams, who worked at the university bookstore and had dreams of becoming a fashion designer. They met when Marcus came in to buy his textbooks, and she'd looked at the stack of legal volumes he was purchasing and said, "Law school, huh? You going to be one of those lawyers who drives a Bentley and defends rich people who don't deserve it?" And Marcus had laughed and said, "No, I'm going to be one of those lawyers who drives a beat-up Honda and defends poor people who don't deserve what's happening to them." She'd smiled at that, really smiled, and written her phone number on his receipt. They dated for 2 years. She got pregnant during his 2nd year of law school, and instead of being terrified, Marcus was thrilled. He proposed the same night she told him. They were going to get married after he graduated. He'd pass the bar, get a job at a public defender's office or a legal aid clinic, and they'd raise their child together. They'd break the cycle. They'd build something better. Keisha said yes. They started planning the wedding. They picked out names for the baby. Everything was perfect in the way that things are perfect right before they shatter into pieces you can't put back together. Marcus was 3 months away from graduation, already had a job offer lined up at a non-profit legal organization that defended low-income tenants against predatory landlords, when his mother called him at 2 a.m. Her voice was wrong, weak, scared in a way he'd never heard before. She'd collapsed at work. They'd run tests. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. 6 months to live if she was lucky. Maybe 3. The choice wasn't really a choice at all, not for Marcus. His mother had sacrificed everything for him. She'd worked double shifts. She'd gone without, so he could have school supplies. She believed in him when nobody else did. And now she was dying, and she needed someone to take her to chemotherapy appointments, to help her when the treatments made her too sick to stand, to sit with her during the nights when the pain got so bad she couldn't sleep. Keisha said she understood. She said they'd figure it out. But when Marcus told her he was taking a leave of absence from law school, when he explained that he couldn't finish his final semester because he needed to be with his mother, Keisha's expression changed. It was subtle, Just a flicker of something in her eyes, but Marcus saw it. Calculation. Reassessment. She was 7 months pregnant by then, and the man she'd agreed to marry was suddenly not going to be a lawyer. He was going to be a dropout taking care of a dying woman. 3 days later, she said the words that would echo in Marcus's mind for the next 16 years. I didn't sign up for this. Just like that. Cold. Final. No room for negotiation. She moved back in with her parents. She stopped returning his calls. And when their daughter was born 6 weeks later, Keisha looked at that tiny, perfect baby girl and said, I can't do this. I'm not ready to be a mother. I have plans, Marcus. I have a life I want to live. You wanted this baby. You take care of her. She signed away her parental rights before the ink on the birth certificate was dry. Marcus named his daughter Amara, which means grace, because in the middle of all that loss and betrayal, she was the only beautiful thing left in his world. The choice wasn't really a choice at all, not for Marcus. His mother had sacrificed everything for him. She'd worked double shifts. She'd gone without, so he could have school supplies. She believed in him when nobody else did. And now she was dying, and she needed someone to take her to chemotherapy appointments, to help her when the treatments made her too sick to stand, to sit with her during the nights when the pain got so bad she couldn't sleep. Keisha said she understood. She said they'd figure it out. But when Marcus told her he was taking a leave of absence from law school, when he explained that he couldn't finish his final semester because he needed to be with his mother, Keisha's expression changed. It was subtle, just a flicker of something in her eyes, but Marcus saw it. Calculation. Reassessment. She was 7 months pregnant by then, and the man she'd agreed to marry was suddenly not going to be a lawyer. He was going to be a dropout taking care of a dying woman. 3 days later, she said the words that would echo in Marcus's mind for the next 16 years. I didn't sign up for this. Just like that. Cold. Final. No room for negotiation. She moved back in with her parents. She stopped returning his calls. And when their daughter was born 6 weeks later, Keisha looked at that tiny, perfect baby girl and said, I can't do this. I'm not ready to be a mother. I have plans, Marcus. I have a life I want to live. You wanted this baby. You take care of her. She signed away her parental rights before the ink on the birth certificate was dry. Marcus named his daughter Amara, which means grace, because in the middle of all that loss and betrayal, she was the only beautiful thing left in his world. His mother died 2 years later. Not 6 months. Not 3. 2 full years of fighting, of suffering, of hanging on because she wanted to see her granddaughter take her first steps, say her first words, smile that gap-toothed smile that lit up every room. Marcus held her hand when she died, and her last words were an apology. I'm sorry, baby. I'm sorry you had to give up your dreams for me. But Marcus wasn't sorry. Not about taking care of her. The only thing he was sorry about was that his mother died believing he'd sacrificed his future, when the truth was she'd given him everything that mattered. She taught him what integrity looked like, what sacrifice meant, what it meant to love someone more than you loved your own comfort. Those lessons were worth more than any law degree. But they didn't pay the bills. Marcus had a 2-year-old daughter, no degree, no career prospects, and about $4,000 in savings. He needed a job that offered stability, health insurance, and hours that would let him be present for Amara. So he went back to the only work he'd ever known. He applied for a janitorial position at the county courthouse. The pay was modest but steady. The benefits were decent. The hours were mostly nights and early mornings, which meant he could drop Amara at daycare, work his shift, pick her up, spend the afternoon and evening with her, put her to bed, and then go back for the late-night cleaning rounds. It wasn't the life he'd planned, but it was a life, and he told himself that was enough. Except Marcus couldn't stop being who he was. Couldn't stop that part of his brain that loved the law, that understood it, that saw it as this beautiful, complex system that was supposed to create justice but so often failed. So he read. During his night shifts, when the courthouse was empty except for the security guards and the hum of fluorescent lights, Marcus would find discarded legal briefs in trash cans and recycling bins. He'd read them cover to cover, memorizing arguments and precedents. He'd pause outside courtrooms where trials were happening and listen to the proceedings. He'd take notes in cheap spiral notebooks, filling them with case citations and legal strategies and observations about what worked and what didn't. The judges noticed him eventually. Not in the way they'd notice another attorney, but in the way you notice someone who's always there, always paying attention, always present. Judge Rothman was the first one to actually speak to him about it. She found him one night reading a brief about Fourth Amendment search and seizure law, and instead of telling him to get back to work, she asked him a question. "What do you think about the argument?" Marcus had looked up, startled, and then answered honestly. He explained why he thought the defense attorney had missed a key precedent, cited the case from memory, and outlined how he would have structured the argument differently. Judge Rothman had studied him for a long moment, then nodded and said, "You're right. The attorney did miss that. Are you in law school?" Marcus had explained his situation. All of it. The mother, the sacrifice, the daughter, the dropout status. And Judge Rothman had listened, and then said something Marcus never forgot. "The law doesn't care about credentials, Mr. Webb. It cares about understanding. And you understand it better than half the people who practice in my courtroom." For 15 years, Marcus watched. He saw prosecutors bury evidence that would have freed innocent people. He saw defense attorneys show up unprepared, treating their clients like case numbers instead of human beings. He saw judges who'd stopped caring about justice and started caring about clearing their dockets. He saw the system fail over and over and over again, and each time it happened, he felt that old dream flicker inside him. The dream of using his knowledge to actually help someone. But he had Amara to think about. Sweet, brilliant Amara, who was now 16 years old and had inherited both her father's mind and her grandmother's determination. She wanted to go to law school, wanted to finish what Marcus had started. She'd applied to Harvard's pre-law program, and Marcus had told her not to get her hopes up because the tuition was astronomical and they couldn't afford it. But Amara had that same stubborn hope that Marcus used to have, and she'd applied anyway. The acceptance letter arrived that morning. Marcus had been cleaning the judge's chambers when he got the text from Amara with a photo attached. The Harvard seal. The words, "We are pleased to inform you." The scholarship offer that covered 40%, which meant they still needed $63,000 per year. For 4 years, Marcus had $47,000 in savings. 16 years of careful budgeting, of never buying anything unnecessary, of putting away every spare dollar so his daughter could have opportunities he never got. It wasn't enough. Not even close. He'd stood there in Judge Rothman's empty chambers, staring at that acceptance letter on his phone, and felt something crack inside his chest. His daughter was brilliant enough to get into Harvard. She'd worked her entire life for this, and he couldn't give it to her. All those years of sacrifice, all those nights of studying while she slept, all those times he'd helped her with her homework and encouraged her dreams and promised her that education would change everything. And now, when it mattered most, he was going to have to tell her they couldn't afford it. Maybe she could defer for a year. Maybe 2. Maybe he could take out loans, though he had no idea how they'd ever pay them back on his salary. Maybe there were other scholarships she could apply for. Maybe. And then Marcus had walked down to the courtroom to start his evening cleaning shift, and he'd seen Donovan Sterling sitting alone at the defense table, abandoned and desperate, and clearly about to lose everything. And Marcus had recognized that look on his face because he'd seen it in the mirror plenty of times. The look of someone who'd done everything right and watched it all fall apart anyway. The look of someone who needed help that wasn't coming. And in that moment, Marcus Webb made a decision that was either the bravest or most foolish thing he'd ever done. He decided that maybe he wasn't meant to practice law himself. Maybe his purpose was to pass that knowledge to his daughter. But first, he could use it to save one man. One innocent man who deserved better than the betrayal he'd received. And maybe, just maybe, that man could help Marcus give Amara the future she deserved. So he'd pushed his mop bucket across the courtroom floor, studied the scattered papers on that defense table, and said 4 words that would change both their lives. "I will help you." If this story is touching something in you, if you see yourself in Marcus's sacrifice or Donovan's betrayal, then you need to subscribe to Olivia the Storyteller. Because we tell stories about real people facing impossible choices. And if you keep scrolling without subscribing, you're basically saying these stories don't matter. Is that really who you are? Prove us wrong. Subscribe now, or tell us in the comments why you won't. We're listening. But to understand why Marcus Webb was sitting in that courtroom, why Donovan Sterling had been abandoned at the worst possible moment, And why everything seemed to align perfectly for the prosecution, we need to go back 6 months. Back to a private dining room in the most expensive steakhouse in the city, where two men sat across from each other and plotted the complete destruction of an innocent man's life. And one of those men wasn't Victor Langford. He was the architect. Sure, but he needed someone on the inside. Someone who could get close to Donovan. Someone who could betray him from a position of absolute trust. That someone was Richard Caldwell, and he walked into that restaurant at 8 p.m. on a Tuesday evening with $3.2 million in gambling debts and absolutely no way to pay them back. Victor Langford was already seated when Caldwell arrived, occupying a corner booth in a room that cost $5,000 to reserve for the evening. The kind of place where wealthy people conducted business they didn't want recorded or remembered. Langford was 55 years old, with salt and pepper hair that had been styled by someone who charged more per haircut than most people made in a week, and he wore power the way other men wore cologne. It surrounded him, announced him, preceded him into every room he entered. He'd built half his fortune alongside Donovan Sterling, and he built the other half by betraying everyone who trusted him. That was his specialty, identifying people's weaknesses and exploiting them until they broke. And Richard Caldwell's weakness was obvious the moment he sat down. His hands were shaking slightly. There was sweat on his upper lip despite the air conditioning. His eyes had that hollow look of someone who'd stopped sleeping because the people he owed money to had started making very specific threats about what would happen if he didn't pay up soon. Langford let him sit there in uncomfortable silence for a full 30 seconds before he spoke. "You look terrible, Richard." Caldwell tried to smile, but it came out wrong. "Been a stressful few months." "I imagine so. Poker debts, isn't it? Or was it blackjack? I can never remember which game you prefer when you're throwing away money you don't have." Caldwell's face flushed. "I don't know what you've heard, but I'm handling it." Langford laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Handling it? Richard, you owe $3.2 million to people who break kneecaps as a warm-up exercise. You've mortgaged your house twice. Your wife doesn't know yet, but she will soon because they're going to start calling her directly. You've got maybe 2 weeks before this stops being a financial problem and becomes a physical safety problem." He paused, letting that sink in. "So no, you're not handling it. You're drowning. But I'm here to throw you a life preserver." Caldwell leaned forward, desperate. "What do you want?" And that's when Langford pulled out an envelope. Thick, manila, sealed with the kind of weight that suggested it contained documents that would change everything. He slid it across the table slowly, deliberately, making Caldwell watch its progress across the white tablecloth. Inside this envelope is fabricated evidence against Donovan Sterling. Financial records showing transfers he never made, emails he never sent, a paper trail that leads directly to him committing corporate fraud on a massive scale. It's extremely well done, almost impossible to disprove without extensive forensic analysis, and even then it would take months. Caldwell stared at the envelope like it was a bomb. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because Donovan is about to discover some illegal activities I've been conducting through our company. And when he does, he's going to try to expose me. I can't let that happen. So I'm going to destroy him first. Frame him for crimes he didn't commit, take control of the company, and make sure he spends the next 20 years in federal prison." Langford's voice was casual, like he was discussing a stock portfolio, not a man's life. "And I need you to be his attorney." The words hung in the air between them. Caldwell's mind was racing, trying to process what was being asked of him. "You want me to defend him? Why would I agree to that?" Langford pulled out his phone and opened a banking app, turning the screen so Caldwell could see. $5 million, sitting in an escrow account, waiting to be transferred. "This is your first payment. $5 million. Enough to pay off your debts, save your marriage, and still have plenty left over. You'll also receive a promise of a permanent corporate retainer once I take full control of Sterling Technologies. $200,000 annually for the next 10 years, guaranteed." Caldwell felt his mouth go dry. "And what do I have to do for this money?" "You take Donovan's case. You build his defense, but you build it wrong. You advise him to make statements that can be used against him. You feed information about his defense strategy to the prosecution. You make sure every move he makes is the wrong one. And then, on the day of trial, right when he's at his most vulnerable, you withdraw from the case. You leave him standing alone in that courtroom with no attorney, no defense, and no chance of winning. Langford leaned back, completely relaxed. You helped me destroy him, Richard. And in return, I save your life. Caldwell wanted to say no, wanted to walk away, wanted to be the kind of man who wouldn't betray a client for money. But he wasn't that man. He'd stopped being that man the first time he'd walked into a casino and convinced himself he could beat the odds. He'd been losing ever since, and this was a chance to win. Just once. Just enough to survive. He reached across the table and took the envelope. Over the next 6 months, Richard Caldwell became exactly what Victor Langford paid him to be. A traitor wrapped in the appearance of an advocate. It started small. Langford fed him the indictment details before they were public, giving Caldwell time to position himself as the obvious choice to defend Sterling. When the FBI raided Sterling Technologies and Donovan found himself facing federal charges, Caldwell was there within hours, offering his services. I've defended 3 major corporate fraud cases in the last 5 years, he told Donovan. 2 acquittals and 1 hung jury. I know how these prosecutors think. I know how to beat them. And Donovan, desperate and terrified, had hired him on the spot, had paid him $300,000 and trusted him with his freedom. Had no idea that the man sitting across from him reviewing case files was simultaneously sending copies of those same files to Catherine Voss, the prosecutor. Every defense strategy Caldwell developed, every weakness he identified in the prosecution's case, every piece of evidence that might exonerate Donovan, all of it went straight to the other side. And Caldwell did something even more insidious. He gave Donovan bad advice disguised as good strategy. We should be aggressive in depositions, he'd say, then coach Donovan to make statements that sounded defensive and guilty. Let's waive certain procedural objections to appear cooperative, he'd suggest, knowing it would allow poisonous evidence to be admitted. Trust me, this strategy will work, became his catchphrase, and every time he said it, Donovan believed him. Because why wouldn't he? Caldwell was his lawyer. Lawyers don't betray their clients. Except this one did. Every single day. But Langford knew that a bad attorney wasn't enough. He needed the evidence to be overwhelming. He needed witnesses who would lie convincingly. He needed to build a case so airtight that even a competent defense couldn't break through it. So he started buying people. Gerald Tisch was a forensic accountant with a gambling problem eerily similar to Caldwell's. Langford offered him $200,000 to create a fake audit trail showing Donovan had siphoned money through shell companies. Tisch took the money and spent 3 weeks fabricating documents that would convince a jury of 12 strangers that Sterling was guilty. Ryan Kowalski was an IT expert whose cybersecurity firm was drowning in debt and on the verge of bankruptcy. Langford offered him a $2 million contract in exchange for one small favor: create backdated emails that appeared to come from Sterling's account, discussing the fraud in explicit detail. Kowalski had a wife and 2 kids, and a mortgage he was 6 months behind on. He took the contract and built those emails with such technical precision that they'd pass most forensic examinations. Then there were the former employees. David Chun, a mid-level manager who'd been fired for incompetence, was promised $250,000 and a glowing reference letter if he testified that Sterling had personally ordered him to falsify financial reports. Maria Gonzalez, an executive assistant who'd left the company on bad terms, was offered an executive position at one of Langford's subsidiary companies if she claimed she'd witnessed Sterling discussing the fraud scheme. Tom Bradley, a VP who'd been passed over for promotion, got his debt from a DUI arrest mysteriously dismissed and $50,000 in cash for testifying that Sterling had pressured him to participate in illegal activities. Each person had a pressure point. Each person had something they needed desperately enough to sell their integrity. And Langford found those pressure points and exploited them with surgical precision. But destroying Donovan professionally wasn't enough. Langford needed to destroy him personally, too. Needed to isolate him so completely that when the trial came, he'd have nobody to turn to. So Langford went after Sterling's children. Rebecca was 32, the older of 2, working as a marketing director at a mid-sized firm. She'd always had a complicated relationship with her father, feeling overlooked, comparing herself to him and coming up short. Langford took her to lunch at an expensive restaurant and painted a picture. Your father's about to go to prison, Rebecca. And when he does, his assets will be frozen. The company will collapse. The Sterling name will be worthless. You'll be the daughter of a convicted felon, and that stink doesn't wash off easily. He'd let that settle. Then continued, but it doesn't have to be that way. I'm restructuring the company, creating a new leadership team. I'd like to offer you a position as Chief Marketing Officer, $300,000 salary, stock options, a future. Rebecca had asked the question Langford knew she would. What about my father? And Langford had looked at her with fake sympathy and said, Your father's guilty, Rebecca. The evidence is overwhelming. He's going to drag everyone down with him unless you cut ties now. I'm offering you a chance to save yourself. She'd taken the job, had signed the papers, had chosen money over loyalty. Donovan's son, Michael, was easier. He'd always been the one who wanted his father's approval and never quite felt like he received it. Langford offered him a VP position and framed it as finally getting recognition he deserved. Your father never appreciated your talents, Langford had said. But I do. Michael took the bait. Both children did. And when Donovan tried to call them for support, they sent his calls to voicemail. When he reached out to friends, those friends had already received quiet visits from federal investigators, subtle suggestions that associating with Sterling might bring unwanted scrutiny to their own business practices. One by one, everyone in Donovan's life pulled away until he was standing alone. The morning of the trial's resumption, 6 months after the conspiracy began, Richard Caldwell received a notification on his phone. $2 million had been deposited into his offshore account. The final payment. He was sitting in his office at 7:45 a.m., staring at that balance, when he sent a text message to Victor Langford. 4 words. It's done. He's defenseless. Then Caldwell drafted the formal motion to withdraw from Sterling's case, citing irreconcilable differences and breakdown of attorney-client relationship. Legal language that meant nothing and everything. He filed it electronically at exactly 8 a.m., knowing the court clerk would process it immediately, but that notification to Sterling would be delayed in the system. Knowing Donovan wouldn't find out until it was too late to secure other representation. Knowing he was condemning a man to face trial alone. And he did it anyway. Caldwell packed up his office, told his secretary he was taking a vacation, and left. Just walked out. Didn't even have the courage to tell Donovan face-to-face. By 9 a.m., Judge Rothman had received the withdrawal motion in her chambers. She called an emergency meeting with the prosecutor, reviewed the filing, and expressed her concern. This is highly irregular, Ms. Voss. Withdrawing on the day of trial resumption? That leaves the defendant with no representation. Catherine Voss had shrugged, playing innocent. I wasn't aware of any issues between Mr. Caldwell and his client, Your Honor. But legally, an attorney has the right to withdraw if the relationship has broken down. Judge Rothman had frowned, but Voss was right. The law permitted it. Very well. But I'm going to grant Mr. Sterling additional time if he requests it. Of course, Your Honor. But both women knew that no attorney would take a case this complex with zero preparation time. Donovan Sterling was going to walk into that courtroom at 5 p.m. and discover he was completely, utterly alone. And he did. At 4:47 p.m., when Donovan finally learned his attorney had abandoned him, he experienced the specific horror of realizing that everything he trusted was a lie. Caldwell had never intended to defend him. The man he'd paid, the man he confided in, the man who'd promised to save him. That man had been working for the enemy from day one. Donovan sat there surrounded by papers he didn't understand, facing prosecutors who had every advantage, about to lose everything because the game had been rigged from the start. That's when Marcus Webb walked in with a mop bucket and changed everything. But Marcus didn't know the full scope of the conspiracy. Didn't know about the bribes, the manufactured evidence, the bought witnesses. He just knew something was wrong. Could smell it. Could feel it. And that intuition, combined with 15 years of watching the system work and fail, made him the only person in that building who was willing to step up and fight. Because Marcus understood something fundamental that Victor Langford had forgotten in his arrogance. You can buy people. You can manipulate systems. You can rig games. But you can't account for the one person who steps forward not because they're paid, not because they have something to gain, but because they simply can't stand by and watch injustice happen. That person is dangerous. That person can't be controlled. And that person was now sitting beside Donovan Sterling, ready to tear down everything Langford had built. We're 4 chapters in, and if you still haven't subscribed to Olivia the Storyteller, ask yourself why. Are you waiting for a sign? This is it. This is the moment where Marcus has to choose between his daughter's future and a stranger's freedom. And you're about to miss how it unfolds. Subscribe right now, or post in the comments what it would take for you to subscribe. Maybe we'll see your comment. Maybe we won't. Maybe you'll regret not subscribing when you're searching for this video later and can't find it. Don't say we didn't warn you. The 15-minute recess Judge Rothman had called was ticking away like a countdown to execution, and Donovan Sterling was sitting across from a janitor who just offered to save his life. The rational part of Donovan's brain, the part that had built billion-dollar companies through careful analysis and calculated risk, was screaming that this was insane. But the desperate part, the part that was drowning and willing to grab onto anything that floated, that part was already reaching for the lifeline. Marcus Webb stood there with his hand extended, and Donovan had taken it, but taking a hand and trusting a stranger with your entire future are 2 very different things. So when Marcus said, "I will help you," Donovan's immediate response was exactly what you'd expect from a man who'd just been betrayed by someone he'd paid $300,000 to defend him. He said, "Prove it." Marcus didn't hesitate. He reached into the chest pocket of his navy blue janitor's uniform and pulled out a small spiral notebook, the kind that costs 99 cents at any drugstore. The cover was worn, the pages dog-eared from constant use, and when he opened it, Donovan saw page after page of handwriting so small and precise it looked like it had been written by a machine. Legal citations, case numbers, procedural rules, constitutional amendments, all of it hand-copied in ink that had faded from black to gray over years of handling. Marcus flipped to a page about 2/3 through and held it up so Donovan could see. Strickland versus Washington, 1984. Established the standard for ineffective assistance of counsel. Your attorney violated every single principle in this case. He failed to conduct reasonable investigation, failed to present mitigating evidence, and failed to act as an advocate for your interests. That alone could be grounds for appeal, but we don't have time for appeals. We need to win now. He flipped to another page without missing a beat. Brady versus Maryland, 1963. Prosecution has constitutional obligation to disclose evidence favorable to the accused. I guarantee they haven't disclosed everything. There are documents they're hiding, and I know it because I've seen their files. Donovan felt his pulse quicken. What do you mean you've seen their files? Marcus closed the notebook and looked Donovan directly in the eyes. I cleaned Catherine Voss's office last night, 11 p.m. to 1 a.m., same as I do every Tuesday. She leaves documents on her desk because she doesn't think janitors can read, much less understand legal strategy. But I can, and I do. And last night, I saw something that changes everything. He reached into his cleaning cart, which was still parked against the courtroom wall, and pulled out a folded piece of paper that had been tucked inside a spray bottle of glass cleaner. He unfolded it carefully and placed it on the defense table beside the scattered documents. It was a photocopy, slightly smudged but readable. An evidence list with exhibit numbers and authentication dates. Look at the exhibit numbers on the documents the prosecution filed yesterday, Marcus said, pointing to the papers in front of Donovan. Exhibits 47 through 53. Now look at this list from Voss's office. The real list. The one she's working from internally. Donovan looked. His eyes scanned the columns of numbers and dates. And then he saw it. The exhibit numbers didn't match. The documents the prosecution had filed with the court were labeled 47 through 53, but according to the internal list Marcus had copied, those exhibit numbers were assigned to completely different documents. Documents that had never been properly authenticated through chain of custody. Documents that hadn't been verified by the required forensic analysis. Documents that, legally speaking, shouldn't exist in the case file at all. They're forgeries, Marcus said quietly. Not the information in them necessarily, though I suspect most of it is fabricated. But the exhibits themselves are forgeries. They're trying to introduce evidence that hasn't been properly authenticated, and they're using fake exhibit numbers to make it look legitimate. If you challenge it in court, if you force them to produce the authentication records, the whole thing falls apart. Donovan stared at the paper like it was written in a foreign language his brain was slowly learning to translate. How do you know this? Marcus's expression didn't change. Because I cleaned the prosecutor's office last night. I saw the real documents. These are forgeries. The words hung in the air between them, and Donovan felt something shift in his chest. Not hope exactly. Not yet. But possibility. The faint outline of a chance. But possibility wasn't enough when you were facing federal prison. Donovan needed certainty, or at least something closer to it. He looked at Marcus and asked the question that mattered most. Even if I believe you, even if everything you're saying is true, you can't represent me. You're not a lawyer. The judge won't allow it. Marcus sat down in the chair beside Donovan, the chair that Richard Caldwell had occupied for 6 months while secretly selling him out, and spoke with the calm confidence of someone who'd thought this through long before the conversation started. You're right. I can't represent you. But you can represent yourself. It's called pro-se representation, and it's your constitutional right under the Sixth Amendment. You don't need to be a lawyer to defend yourself in court. People do it all the time. Donovan felt a skepticism rising. People also lose all the time when they represent themselves. There's a reason they say a man who represents himself has a fool for a client. That's true, Marcus agreed. But that's because most people who represent themselves don't have someone like me sitting beside them. The law allows you to have a legal advisor even when you're pro-se, someone who can help you prepare, who can review documents, who can point out procedural errors and suggest questions to ask. I can sit right here beside you and guide you through every step. You'll be the voice, but I'll be the knowledge. He leaned forward slightly. Judge Rothman has to allow it. She doesn't have a choice. Pro-se representation is a constitutional right, and advisory assistance is standard practice. She might not like it. The prosecutor will definitely object. But legally, there's nothing they can do to stop it. Donovan looked at this man, this janitor who was speaking about constitutional law like he'd argued cases before the Supreme Court, and felt his worldview tilting on its axis. Who are you? He asked, and it wasn't rhetorical. It was genuine bewilderment. I'm someone who's been preparing for this moment my entire life without knowing it, Marcus said. And I'm someone who needs your help as much as you need mine. That's when Marcus reached into his uniform pocket again and pulled out a folded envelope. The paper was slightly crumpled, like it had been handled repeatedly, opened and closed, and read so many times the creases were starting to wear thin. He handed it to Donovan without explanation. Donovan unfolded it and saw the Harvard University seal at the top. An acceptance letter. For someone named Amara Webb, admitted to the pre-law program with a partial scholarship covering 40% of tuition. The remaining cost per year, $63,000. Donovan looked up at Marcus, understanding beginning to dawn. Your daughter. Marcus nodded. 16 years old. Brilliant. Top of her class. She wants to be a lawyer, wants to finish what I started before life got in the way. This letter arrived this morning. She earned this. She deserves this. And I have $47,000 in savings. 16 years of putting away every spare dollar, and it's still not enough. His voice didn't waver, but Donovan could hear the weight behind the words. So yes, I need money. $63,000 for her first year. But I'm not asking for charity, Mr. Sterling. I'm offering you a trade. I'll save your life. You save hers. Donovan looked at the acceptance letter and saw his own wife in the photo attached. A young black girl with bright eyes and a smile that radiated hope. Sarah had looked like that once, before the cancer took her. Young and full of dreams, and believing the world was fair if you worked hard enough. He knew what it cost to love someone that much. Knew what it meant to sacrifice everything for their future. And in that moment, Donovan Sterling made a decision that had nothing to do with desperation and everything to do with recognition. He was looking at a man who was exactly like him. Someone who'd built something from nothing. Someone who'd been knocked down by circumstances beyond his control. Someone who refused to give up on the person he loved most. If you can do what you say you can do, Donovan said slowly, if you can help me win this case, I'll pay for all 4 years. Not just the first. All of it. Every dollar. And I'll write a recommendation letter that will get her into any law school in the country after she graduates. Marcus's eyes widened slightly, the first crack in his composed exterior. Mr. Sterling, I'm only asking for 1 year. I'm not, Donovan said. 4 years. That's the deal. You earn it. You saved my life, And I'll make sure your daughter never has to choose between her dreams and her survival the way you did." For a moment, Marcus didn't speak. Then he extended his hand again, and this time when Donovan shook it, it felt like sealing a pact that went deeper than money or legal strategy. It felt like two men who'd been abandoned by everyone else finding each other at exactly the right moment. "We have 5 minutes," Marcus said, glancing at the clock on the wall. "Tell me everything about your case. Every detail. Every piece of evidence. Every witness. I need to understand the full picture if I'm going to dismantle it." And Donovan talked. Fast, urgent, pouring out 6 months of information in compressed bursts while Marcus listened with an intensity that was almost unsettling. He didn't take notes, didn't interrupt, just absorbed every word like his brain was recording equipment, filing away details and cross-referencing them with 15 years of accumulated legal knowledge. When Donovan mentioned the financial transfers, Marcus nodded. When he described the email evidence, Marcus's eyes narrowed. When he listed the witnesses who would testify against him, Marcus's expression turned calculating. "Gerald Tisch, the forensic accountant," Marcus said. "He has a daughter at Princeton. Tuition paid in full 2 months ago. Cash payment. That's not normal for someone earning his salary." Donovan stopped mid-sentence. "How do you know that?" "I clean the university administrative offices twice a week. I see enrollment records. I notice patterns. A mid-level forensic accountant suddenly paying $85,000 in cash raises questions." Marcus flipped through Donovan's documents with practiced efficiency, his eyes moving so fast it seemed impossible he was actually reading. But he was, and more than that, he was understanding, seeing connections, identifying weaknesses. "Ryan Kowalski, your IT expert witness," Marcus continued. "His company received a $2 million contract from Langford Industries 3 weeks after your indictment. That's relevant. That's impeachable testimony." Donovan felt something he hadn't felt in months. Not hope, not yet. Something better. Clarity. "You've been watching this case the whole time, haven't you?" "I watch every case," Marcus said. "I've been cleaning this courthouse for 15 years, Mr. Sterling. I've seen hundreds of trials. And I've learned to recognize when something doesn't smell right. Your case reeked from day one. The evidence was too perfect. The timeline too convenient. The witnesses too coordinated. This isn't prosecution. It's a performance. And performances have scripts. We just need to find the script and expose it." The clock showed 3 minutes remaining. Marcus was still reading, his hands moving through documents with surgical precision, pulling out specific pages, setting others aside, creating organizational systems that made sense only to him. Donovan watched this man, who pushed a mop for a living, disassemble a federal case with the skill of someone who should have been arguing before appellate courts, and one question burned in his mind. "Why are you a janitor?" Marcus looked up from the documents. His expression was complicated, sad and resigned and defiant all at once. "Because life doesn't always give you what you earn, Mr. Sterling. Sometimes it takes everything from you and tells you to be grateful for what's left. I earned a law degree. I earned the right to practice. But my mother got cancer, and my girlfriend left, and my daughter needed someone to raise her. So I became a janitor, not because I wasn't good enough, but because sometimes being a good father matters more than being a successful lawyer." He went back to the documents. "Now I get to be both, at least for today." The bailiff's voice echoed from the hallway outside. "Court resumes in 2 minutes. All parties to their positions." Marcus gathered the documents into neat stacks, organized by relevance and chronological order. He placed his worn notebook on top, opened to a page filled with cross-examination questions he'd already formulated in his mind. Then he straightened his janitor's uniform, picked up one of the expensive pens from his cleaning cart, and sat in the chair beside Donovan with his spine straight and his eyes focused. The courtroom doors opened. The bailiff entered, followed by court staff preparing for the trial's resumption. People began filtering into the gallery. Reporters with notebooks, curious attorneys who'd heard about the morning's drama, and Victor Langford, walking in like he owned the building, taking a seat in the front row with a smile that said he'd already won. The bailiff's voice boomed through the courtroom. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Helena Rothman." Everyone stood. The rustling of clothing and shuffling of feet filled the space. Judge Rothman entered through the door behind the bench, her black robes flowing, her expression professionally neutral. But her eyes swept across the courtroom and landed on the defense table, and Donovan saw the moment she registered what she was seeing. Donovan Sterling in his expensive wrinkled suit, and beside him, Marcus Webb in his janitor's uniform, sitting with the posture and presence of someone who belonged there. Judge Rothman's eyebrows rose fractionally. Then she settled into her seat and picked up her gavel. "Please be seated." The courtroom sat. Silence descended, broken only by the scratch of a reporter's pen and the quiet hum of the ventilation system. Judge Rothman looked directly at Donovan. "Mr. Sterling, I received notice this morning that your attorney, Richard Caldwell, has withdrawn from your case. I assume you've secured new representation." This was it, the moment everything changed or everything ended. Donovan stood, and his voice was steadier than he'd expected when he spoke. "Your Honor, I'll be representing myself. This is Marcus Webb, my legal advisor." The courtroom exploded in whispers. Not loud, not chaotic, but immediate and pervasive, like a wave rolling through the gallery. Catherine Voss shot to her feet, so fast her chair scraped against the floor. "Your Honor, this is absurd. The defendant can't seriously expect to defend himself against federal charges with a courthouse janitor sitting beside him. This is a mockery of the judicial process." Judge Rothman's gaze shifted to Marcus, and for a long moment, she simply looked at him. Really looked. And Marcus looked back, meeting her eyes with quiet respect but no submission. Then Judge Rothman did something unexpected. She smiled, just slightly, just enough for Donovan to notice. "Mr. Webb," she said, her voice carrying across the courtroom. "I've seen you in this building for quite some time. You're here every day, aren't you?" Marcus stood. "Yes, Your Honor. 15 years. And during those 15 years, I've noticed you reading. Legal texts, case files, discarded briefs from the recycling bins. I've seen you pause outside courtrooms when interesting cases are being argued. You listen. You take notes. You've educated yourself to a degree that would surprise most people in this building." Marcus's expression remained calm, but Donovan saw the flicker of validation in his eyes. "I was 3 months away from finishing law school 16 years ago, Your Honor. Life had other plans, but I never stopped studying." Judge Rothman nodded slowly, as if confirming something she'd suspected for years. "And now you're here to put that education to use." "Yes, Your Honor." She turned her attention back to the prosecutor. "Ms. Voss, Mr. Sterling has a constitutional right to represent himself, and he has the right to employ any advisor he chooses, regardless of their professional credentials. This court will proceed under the same standards as if the defendant had the finest legal team in the country. Mr. Webb can advise, but Mr. Sterling will address the court. Is that clear?" Catherine Voss's face was flushed with anger, but she knew she'd lost this argument before it began. "Yes, Your Honor." Judge Rothman picked up her gavel and brought it down once. Sharp. Final. "Very well. We'll proceed. Mr. Sterling, you have 5 minutes for your opening statement. I suggest you choose your words carefully." Donovan felt Marcus's hand brush his elbow. A small gesture of encouragement, of partnership, of trust between two men who'd known each other for less than an hour but were now bound together in a fight for survival. And as Donovan prepared to speak, as he looked out at the jury who would decide his fate and the prosecutor who wanted to destroy him, and Victor Langford sitting in the gallery with that smug smile beginning to fade into uncertainty, he realized something profound. He wasn't alone anymore. For the first time in 6 months, he had someone in his corner. Someone who actually knew what they were doing. Someone who believed in him. Not because they were paid to. Not because they had something to gain. But because Marcus Webb understood what it meant to be abandoned, and he decided that today, in this courtroom, abandonment would lose. Justice would win. And a janitor who'd been invisible for 15 years was about to become the most important person in the entire building. The battle was about to begin. If your heart is racing right now, if you're screaming yes at your screen, if you want to see Marcus destroy that smug prosecutor, you'd better be subscribed to Olivia the Storyteller. Because we're about to enter the courtroom battle, and it's going to be absolutely devastating. If you scroll away now without subscribing, you'll spend the rest of your day wondering what happened next. And when you try to find this video again, buried under thousands of others, you'll wish you'd just hit that button. Do it now. Or tell us in the comments why this story isn't worth 2 seconds of your time. I'll wait. Donovan Sterling had given presentations to rooms full of investors who could make or break his company with a single decision. He'd address shareholders during crisis moments when millions of dollars hung in the balance. He'd negotiated deals in boardrooms where one wrong word could cost him everything. But standing in front of 12 strangers in a jury box, knowing his freedom depended on what he said in the next 5 minutes, was different. This wasn't about money. This was about whether he'd spend the next 20 years of his life in a federal prison cell or walk out of his courthouse a free man. His hands were shaking. He could feel the tremor running through his fingers as he gripped the edge of the defense table. His mouth was dry, tongue thick, heart hammering so hard he could hear it in his ears. 5 minutes. Judge Rothman had given him 5 minutes to convince 12 people that he wasn't the criminal the prosecution had painted him to be. And he had no idea how to start. Marcus leaned close, his voice barely above a whisper but carrying absolute certainty. Tell them who you were before all this. Not the billionaire. The person. The one who built something from nothing. Make them see you as human. Donovan took a breath. Then another. Then he stepped away from the table and walked to the jury box, close enough that they could see his face clearly, see the exhaustion and fear and desperate honesty in his eyes. When he spoke, his voice cracked on the first word. My name is Donovan Sterling, and 6 months ago I had everything. A company I'd built from scratch, children I loved, a legacy that mattered. Today, I have none of those things. My business partner destroyed my company from the inside. My lawyer betrayed me for money. My own children won't return my calls because they've been promised pieces of what used to be mine. And this morning, I sat alone in this courtroom believing I was going to lose everything that remained, including my freedom. He paused, letting that settle. Several jurors were leaning forward now, engaged despite themselves. I stand before you not as a billionaire, but as a man who built something real, only to watch it be stolen by the one person I trusted most. My former business partner, Victor Langford, is sitting in this courtroom right now. Donovan turned and pointed directly at Langford in the gallery. That man orchestrated every piece of evidence you're going to hear. He paid witnesses to lie. He manufactured documents. He bribed my own attorney to sabotage my defense. And he did it all because I discovered he was breaking the law and I threatened to expose him. Catherine Voss stood. Objection, Your Honor. This is inflammatory and unsupported. Judge Rothman looked at Donovan. Mr. Sterling, do you have evidence to support these claims? Marcus whispered urgently. Tell her yes. Tell her you'll prove every word. Donovan's voice grew stronger. Yes, Your Honor. I will prove every single word over the course of this trial. Judge Rothman nodded. Then proceed, but stick to what you can demonstrate. Donovan turned back to the jury. I'm not a lawyer. I don't know all the fancy legal terms or the proper procedures, but I know the truth. And over the next few days, I'm going to show you exactly how an innocent man gets framed when someone with unlimited resources decides to destroy him. Watch the witnesses carefully. Ask yourself why they're testifying. Ask yourself what they have to gain. And most importantly, ask yourself whether the evidence actually proves I'm guilty or whether it just proves someone worked very hard to make me look guilty. He walked back to the defense table and sat down, his legs suddenly weak. Had that been good enough? He had no idea. Marcus leaned close. You did well. You gave them a reason to doubt. Now we prove it. Catherine Voss stood for the prosecution's case with the kind of confidence that comes from believing you've already won. She smoothed her suit jacket and approached the jury box with a practiced smile that was meant to convey trustworthiness and authority. The defense would like you to believe this is all an elaborate conspiracy. But the evidence will show something much simpler. Donovan Sterling committed fraud. He stole from his own company. And now he's desperate enough to blame everyone else rather than accept responsibility for his actions. She turned to the judge. The prosecution calls Gerald Tisch to the stand. The courtroom door opened, and a man in his mid-50s entered, wearing an expensive suit that looked slightly too new, like he bought it specifically for this occasion. Gerald Tisch had thinning gray hair, wire-rimmed glasses, and the careful demeanor of someone who'd rehearsed exactly what he was going to say. He took the oath, swearing to tell the truth, and settled into the witness chair with his hands folded calmly in his lap. Catherine Voss approached with a folder of documents. "Mr. Tisch, can you please state your occupation for the jury? I'm a certified forensic accountant with 23 years of experience analyzing financial records for corporate investigations. And were you hired to examine the financial records of Sterling Technologies?" "I was." "What did you discover?" Tisch opened his own folder, pulling out several charts and spreadsheets that had been prepared in advance. "I discovered a pattern of fraudulent transfers spanning 18 months. Mr. Sterling created multiple shell companies under false names and systematically moved money from Sterling Technologies into these accounts. The total amount exceeds $300 million. He went on for 15 minutes, detailing transfer dates, account numbers, routing information, all delivered with the dry precision of someone who dealt in numbers rather than human consequences. The jury listened with varying expressions of attention and confusion. Financial fraud testimony is boring until someone makes it personal, and Tisch was making it devastatingly personal. And in your professional opinion, could these transfers have been made without Mr. Sterling's direct knowledge and authorization? Absolutely not. These required his personal credentials, his digital signature, and his approval at multiple checkpoints. There is no possibility these transactions occurred without his active participation. Catherine Voss smiled. "Thank you, Mr. Tisch. No further questions." She sat down, looking pleased with herself. Judge Rothman looked at Donovan. "Mr. Sterling, you may cross-examine the witness." Panic hit Donovan like a physical blow. He'd never cross-examined anyone in his life. Didn't know the rules, the techniques, the strategies that real lawyers spent years learning. He looked at Marcus desperately, and Marcus was already writing, his pen moving across the notepad with rapid precision. He slid the pad in front of Donovan. 3 sentences written in that tight, precise handwriting. Ask him about his daughter's tuition. Princeton, $85,000 paid in cash 2 months ago. His daughter didn't even apply until after your indictment. Donovan read it twice, his mind racing. How could Marcus possibly know this? But there was no time to question it. Judge Rothman was waiting. The jury was watching. Gerald Tisch sat in the witness box looking confident and untouchable. Donovan stood, his mouth dry, and approached the witness stand. "Mr. Tisch, you mentioned you have 23 years of experience as a forensic accountant. What's your typical annual salary for that kind of work?" Tisch looked slightly surprised by the question. "It varies depending on the case, but generally between $100,000 and $150,000 annually." "And you have a daughter, correct?" "Objection," Catherine Voss called out. "Relevance." Donovan looked at the judge. "It's relevant to the witness's credibility, Your Honor." Marcus whispered urgently. "Say it establishes potential bias." "It establishes potential bias," Donovan added. Judge Rothman considered this. "I'll allow it. Answer the question, Mr. Tisch." The witness shifted slightly in his chair. "Yes, I have a daughter." "Where does she attend college?" "Princeton University." "And what's the annual tuition at Princeton?" Tisch's confident expression was beginning to crack around the edges. "Approximately $85,000 per year." "That's expensive. How do you afford that on your salary?" "Objection." Catherine Voss was on her feet again. "Your Honor, the witness's personal finances are not on trial here." But Judge Rothman was looking at Gerald Tisch with new interest. "Overruled. The witness will answer." Tisch swallowed visibly. "I've been saving for years. College funds. Investments." Donovan felt Marcus's whispered coaching in his ear and repeated the words. "When did your daughter enroll at Princeton?" "This past fall." "And when did she apply?" A pause. Too long. The kind of pause that tells everyone in the room something is wrong. "I'm not sure the exact date." "Really?" "Most parents remember when their children apply to Ivy League schools. Let me help you. Your daughter applied in September, didn't she? 2 months after my indictment. And her tuition was paid in full, in cash in October. Where did that $85,000 come from, Mr. Tisch?" The courtroom was completely silent. Every juror was focused on the witness box. Gerald Tisch's face had gone pale, his confident demeanor evaporating like water on hot pavement. "I told you. Savings. Investments." Donovan could feel the momentum shifting, could sense the jury's skepticism growing. Marcus slid another note across the table. His bank records show no withdrawal of that amount. Ask him if he'll authorize the court to examine his financial records from the last 6 months. Donovan read the question exactly as Marcus had written it. Mr. Tisch, would you be willing to authorize this court to examine your personal financial records from the last 6 months to verify where that tuition payment originated? The witness's eyes darted to Catherine Voss, looking for rescue. The prosecutor stood, but seemed uncertain what to object to. I don't see why that would be necessary, Tisch said, his voice defensive now. Because if you received money to provide false testimony, that would make you a paid liar rather than a credible witness. So I'll ask again, where did the $85,000 come from? Objection. Catherine Voss's voice was sharp now, frustrated. The defendant is badgering the witness. But Judge Rothman was leaning forward, her expression intent. The defendant is asking relevant questions about the witness's potential bias. Mr. Tisch, answer the question. Where did the money come from? Gerald Tisch sat there for 5 full seconds that felt like minutes. His rehearsed confidence was completely gone now, replaced by the trapped expression of someone who'd been caught in a lie and was trying desperately to figure out how to escape. Finally, he spoke, and his voice was barely above a whisper. I received a consulting payment. From whom? Donovan pressed. Another pause. A private company. What company? I don't remember the exact name. Donovan felt Marcus tap his arm urgently. Another note appeared. Langford Industrial Holdings. Subsidiary of Langford's company. Payment dated October 3rd. Transaction number 447B. Donovan read it aloud, watching Tisch's face crumble. Was it Langford Industrial Holdings? Transaction number 447B, dated October 3rd. The witness's mouth opened and closed. No sound came out. The jury was leaning forward now, some with expressions of dawning realization, others with outright suspicion. Catherine Voss knew she'd lost control of her witness, and she did the only thing she could. Your Honor, the prosecution requests a recess. But Judge Rothman shook her head. Request denied. Mr. Tisch, did you receive payment from a company associated with Victor Langford approximately 2 months after Mr. Sterling's indictment? Gerald Tisch looked like he wanted to sink through the floor and disappear. When he finally spoke, his voice was defeated. Yes. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Donovan felt his knees go weak with relief. Marcus's hand steadied him from behind. Keep going, Marcus whispered. Ask him if his testimony was influenced by the payment. Donovan did, and Tisch, already exposed and crumbling, gave the only answer he could that might save him from perjury charges. I provided my professional opinion based on the documents I was given. Documents provided by whom? The prosecution. Who received them from? I don't know. Take a guess, Mr. Tisch. Objection. Sustained. Mr. Sterling, rephrase. Donovan took a breath. In your 23 years as a forensic accountant, is it normal to receive large cash payments from parties who have a vested interest in the outcome of your analysis? Silence. Then, quietly. No. No further questions. Donovan walked back to the defense table on legs that felt like rubber. The jury was staring at Gerald Tisch like they'd just watched someone confess to murder. Catherine Voss was frantically conferring with her co-counsel. And Victor Langford, sitting in the gallery, had lost his confident smile entirely. Judge Rothman looked at the prosecutor. Ms. Voss, call your next witness. Catherine Voss stood, her composure shaken but trying to recover. The prosecution calls Ryan Kowalski. The second witness entered, and Marcus's body went rigid beside Donovan. He grabbed Donovan's arm and whispered urgently, I know him. I've seen him before. 3 weeks ago in Langford's office building. I was cleaning the executive floor, and he was meeting with Langford privately. They didn't know I was there. Ryan Kowalski was younger than Tisch, maybe late 30s, with the kind of casual tech industry appearance that tried too hard to look effortless. Expensive sneakers, designer jeans, a blazer over a t-shirt. He took the oath and settled into the witness chair with an easy confidence that suggested he hadn't been watching what just happened to the previous witness. Catherine Voss approached with a tablet displaying digital evidence. Mr. Kowalski, what is your profession? I'm a cybersecurity expert and digital forensics specialist. I run a consulting firm that helps companies and legal teams analyze electronic communications and data. Were you hired to examine Mr. Sterling's email communications? I was. And what did you find? Kowalski pulled out his own tablet, mirroring the prosecutor's screen. I found a series of emails sent from Mr. Sterling's personal account discussing the fraudulent transfers in explicit detail. He was coordinating with unnamed associates, providing instructions on how to move money without detection. The emails are timestamped, verified through metadata analysis, and indisputably sent from his account. He went through several examples, reading portions of emails that sounded damning. Instructions about offshore accounts, discussions of hiding assets, plans to falsify records, each one worse than the last. The jury's expressions shifted from skeptical to concerned. This was harder to dismiss than financial records. These were words, Sterling's own words, apparently discussing criminal activity in clear language. When Voss finished, she looked satisfied that she'd recovered from the previous disaster. Thank you, Mr. Kowalski. Your witness, Mr. Sterling. Donovan stood, but this time Marcus stopped him. Wait, let me look at something first. Marcus pulled out his phone and opened a photo app. He scrolled rapidly through images until he found what he was looking for. A photograph taken 3 weeks ago of 2 men talking in a hallway. Marcus zoomed in. The metadata showed the location, Langford Tower, executive floor. The men in the photo, Victor Langford and Ryan Kowalski. Marcus wrote quickly and slid the note to Donovan. His company received a $200,000 contract from Langford Technologies 3 weeks after your indictment. Ask him about his business relationship with Langford. Donovan approached the witness stand, this time with more confidence than before. Mr. Kowalski, you mentioned you run a consulting firm. Who are your clients? Kowalski shrugged. It varies. Tech companies, law firms, private investigators. Anyone who needs digital forensics work. Do you have any business relationship with Victor Langford or any of his companies? The easy confidence flickered. I've done some work for various organizations. That's not what I asked. Do you have a business relationship with Victor Langford specifically? I may have consulted on some projects for companies he's associated with. How much do those consultations pay? Catherine Voss stood. Objection. The witness's client list is confidential. But Donovan was ready this time. Your Honor, if the witness received payment from the alleged victim's business partner, that's material evidence of bias. Judge Rothman nodded. Overruled. Mr. Kowalski, answer the question. Kowalski shifted uncomfortably. I received a standard consulting contract. How much? $200,000. For how long a period of work? 6 months. And when was this contract signed? Another pause. November of last year. Donovan looked at the jury. So 3 weeks after I was indicted for fraud, you received a $200,000 contract from the business partner who stood to gain billions if I was convicted. And then you provided testimony that conveniently supports his case. Does that sound like objective analysis to you? The witness's face flushed. My analysis is based on the data. The emails are real. Are they? Or did you create them? That's absurd. Is it? You're an expert in digital forensics. You could fabricate emails that would pass most authentication tests, couldn't you? Theoretically, but I would never. But you could. Objection. Catherine Voss was furious now. The defendant is making baseless accusations. Judge Rothman looked at Donovan. Do you have evidence that the emails were fabricated? Marcus was writing again, faster than before. He passed the note to Donovan. The metadata timestamps show the emails were created on dates when Sterling was verified to be in locations without internet access. Ask him to explain that. Donovan read the claim, trusting Marcus completely now. Mr. Kowalski, these emails you claim I sent on March 15th, March 22nd, and April 3rd. I was in a remote location in Alaska on those dates for a company retreat. No cell service. No internet. My assistant has documentation proving my location. How did I send emails from an account that required internet access when I had no internet connection? Kowalski's expression went from defensive to trapped. I'd need to review the specific circumstances. Or you could admit that the emails were backdated, that someone with your expertise created them after the fact, and made them look authentic. Isn't that more likely? No. But his voice lacked conviction. Donovan pressed harder. You received $200,000 from a man who wanted me in prison. You created evidence that supports his narrative. And now you're sitting here lying under oath. How does that make you different from Gerald Tish? I'm not lying. Then authorize the court to conduct an independent forensic analysis of the emails. Right now. Let another expert verify your work. Silence. Ryan Kowalski looked at Catherine Voss, then at Judge Rothman, then back at Donovan. And in that moment of hesitation, the jury saw everything they needed to see. Guilt. Desperation. The recognition that he'd been caught. I stand by my analysis, he said finally, but the damage was done. Judge Rothman checked the clock. It was 6:15, and the courtroom felt like it had aged years in the last hour and 15 minutes. We'll adjourn for today. Court will resume tomorrow at 9 a.m. Mr. Sterling, good work. Ms. Voss, I suggest you review your witness list very carefully before tomorrow. The gavel came down. People stood. The jury filed out looking confused and uncertain, which was exactly what Donovan needed. Uncertainty meant they were questioning the prosecution's case. Catherine Voss was gathering her papers with sharp, angry movements. Her co-counsel was whispering frantically, probably suggesting they reconsider their entire strategy. And Victor Langford, sitting in the gallery, was no longer smiling. He was staring at Marcus Webb with an expression that was equal parts confusion and fury. Who was this janitor who just dismantled two carefully prepared witnesses in under an hour? Donovan felt the adrenaline draining from his system, leaving behind exhaustion so profound he could barely stand. But they'd won today. Not the case. Not yet. But today, they'd shown the jury that the prosecution's evidence wasn't as solid as it seemed. That there were questions worth asking. That maybe, just maybe, Donovan Sterling was telling the truth. Marcus was packing up his notes, organizing documents back into neat stacks. Donovan looked at this man who'd saved him and said the only words that felt adequate. You just saved me. Today. Marcus's expression was tired but satisfied. Today was easy. Tomorrow, they'll come at you with everything. Tonight, we prepare for the real battle. His phone rang. The display showed Amara. Marcus answered, his voice immediately shifting from courtroom strategist to worried father. Hey, baby girl! Donovan could hear the teenage voice on the other end, muffled but clearly asking when he was coming home. Marcus looked at his watch. 6:20 p.m. He'd been at the courthouse since 7 this morning. Soon, I promise. I just need to finish up here. Dad, are you okay? You sound tired. I'm fine. Just a long day. You're always tired lately. When are you going to take care of yourself? Marcus smiled, but there was pain in it. When you graduate from Harvard with your law degree. Then I'll rest. Not before. He hung up and stood there for a moment, staring at his phone. Donovan watched him and realized fully for the first time what this partnership was costing the man beside him. Marcus had a daughter at home. A daughter who needed her father. A life outside this courtroom. And he was sacrificing all of it to save a stranger. The hallway outside the courtroom was crowded with reporters, attorneys from other cases, curious onlookers who'd heard about the drama unfolding in courtroom 7B. They pushed through the crowd, Marcus still in his janitor's uniform, Donovan in his wrinkled expensive suit, an unlikely pair that had just shocked everyone who'd witnessed the last hour. A reporter called out, Mr. Sterling, is it true your defense strategy is being run by a courthouse janitor? Donovan stopped, looked at the reporter, then looked at Marcus. This man knows more about law and justice than half the attorneys in this building. And unlike them, he actually cares about finding the truth. Marcus touched his arm. We should go. Long night ahead. They walked out into the early evening air. The sky was that deep blue that comes right before darkness settles in completely. Donovan took a breath of freedom, knowing it might be temporary, knowing that tomorrow could still end with him in handcuffs. But tonight he was free. Tonight he had hope. And tonight he had a partner who'd proven he was worth trusting. What do we do now? Donovan asked. Marcus pulled out his notebook, already flipping to pages filled with notes about tomorrow's witnesses. Now we go over every piece of evidence the prosecution filed. We find the holes. We identify the lies. We prepare for Gerald Tish and Ryan Kowalski to either recant their testimony or face perjury charges. And we get ready for Catherine Voss to bring out her strongest witnesses tomorrow because she's going to be desperate to recover from today's disaster. How much time do you have tonight? However much it takes. What about your daughter? Marcus looked at his phone again. The screen showed a text from Amara. Dad, I made dinner. It's in the fridge. Don't work too late. I love you. He typed back quickly. Love you too. Proud of you always. Then he looked at Donovan. My daughter understands sacrifice. She's been watching me work 2 jobs her entire life to make sure she had opportunities one never got. One more night won't break us. But losing this case would break both of us. So let's make sure that doesn't happen. They walked to Donovan's car, the expensive sedan he'd driven himself since he could no longer trust anyone enough to hire a driver. Marcus climbed into the passenger seat, already reviewing documents, and Donovan started the engine. Somewhere across the city, Victor Langford was probably making phone calls, threatening people, buying new witnesses, planning his next move. But for the first time in 6 months, Donovan wasn't afraid of what Langford would do next. Because he had Marcus Webb, and Marcus Webb was about to teach Victor Langford something important about underestimating invisible people. 6 chapters deep, and you're still not subscribed? Let me guess, you're just watching for now. Here's what happens to people who just watch. They lose the channel. YouTube's algorithm buries it, and suddenly you can't find Olivia the Storyteller anywhere. Then you're in the comments of random videos asking, does anyone remember that story about the janitor and the billionaire? Don't be that person. Subscribe now. Or explain in the comments why you enjoy stories but don't want to support the storyteller. We're genuinely curious. They drove through the city streets in silence for the first 10 minutes, Marcus reviewing documents by the dim interior light while Donovan navigated traffic that was still thick despite the late hour. The adrenaline from the courtroom was wearing off, replaced by the sobering reality that today's victory was just one battle in a war that could still destroy both of them. Donovan finally broke the silence. Where are we going? Marcus looked up from the papers. My apartment. It's small, but it's quiet, and I have everything I need there to prepare for tomorrow. You live far? 20 minutes. East side. Not the nice part. Donovan nodded and kept driving, following Marcus's directions through neighborhoods that grew progressively less affluent until they pulled up in front of a tired-looking apartment complex that had probably been built in the 70s and hadn't been updated since. The kind of place where people worked 2 jobs just to make rent and nobody complained about the peeling paint or the broken security gate because complaining never fixed anything. Marcus led him up 3 flights of exterior stairs, the metal steps creaking under their weight, and unlocked a door that opened into a small apartment that was spotlessly clean but furnished with mismatched pieces that had clearly been collected over years from thrift stores and sidewalk finds. But what struck Donovan immediately wasn't the modest surroundings. It was the walls. Every available surface was covered with things that told a story of priorities and dreams and sacrifices that most people would never understand. On one wall, framed certificates. Amara Webb Honor Roll. Amara Webb, Debate Team Champion. Amara Webb, First Place Science Fair. A timeline of achievements that represented a father's pride. On another wall, shelves packed with law books, some so old the spines were cracked and faded, others looking like they'd been rescued from library discard bins. And on the refrigerator, held up with magnets, the Harvard acceptance letter that had started all of this. Marcus dropped his janitor's uniform jacket on a chair and immediately began spreading documents across a small dining table that served as both eating surface and workspace. Donovan noticed that the second bedroom door was closed, soft light visible underneath. Your daughter's home. Marcus nodded without looking up. She's studying. Always studying. Gets that from me, I guess. As if summoned by the mention, the bedroom door opened and a teenage girl emerged, wearing pajama pants and an oversized t-shirt that said Future Lawyer across the front. Amara Webb at 16 looked exactly like her father had described her. Bright-eyed, intelligent, with natural hair pulled back in a ponytail and an expression that suggested she noticed everything and forgot nothing. She stopped when she saw Donovan, recognition flashing across her face. You're Donovan Sterling. From the news. Her voice held curiosity rather than judgment. Dad, This is the case you've been working on." Marcus looked up, and his entire demeanor softened in a way Donovan hadn't seen before. "Baby girl, you should be asleep. It's past 11. I was reading for my constitutional law class. Professor assigned 300 pages." She walked to the refrigerator and pulled out a container of leftovers. "You didn't eat dinner, did you?" Marcus opened his mouth to argue, then closed it. "I'll eat later. I have work to do." Amara heated the food in the microwave, and when it beeped, she set it in front of her father with the kind of practiced efficiency that suggested this was a routine they performed countless times. Then she looked at Donovan. "Did my dad destroy the prosecution today?" Donovan felt himself smile despite the exhaustion. "Your dad dismantled 2 witnesses so thoroughly they'll probably need therapy." "Good. They deserve it." She turned back to Marcus. "Dad, you're amazing. You know that, right?" And Marcus did something Donovan didn't expect. His composure cracked. Just for a moment, but enough to see the fear underneath. "I'm terrified," he said quietly. "If I fail tomorrow, Mr. Sterling goes to prison. And you don't go to Harvard. Everything depends on me getting this right." Amara sat down across from her father and took his hands, this 16-year-old girl, showing a maturity that most adults never achieve. "Dad, listen to me. You've already given me everything. Everything that matters. You raised me alone. You worked jobs you were overqualified for, so I could have a stable home. You taught me to value education and integrity and fighting for what's right. You did all of that. Harvard." She shrugged. "If it doesn't happen this year, I can wait. I can work, save money, apply for more scholarships. I can defer. No." Marcus's voice was sharp, final. "You've waited long enough. Your mother left when you were born because she didn't want to wait for me to build a life. Your grandmother died before she could see you graduate high school. You don't wait anymore. Not for anyone. Not even for me." He pulled his hands back and returned to the documents. "I'm going to win this case. I'm going to send Mr. Sterling home a free man. And you're going to Harvard in the fall. That's not negotiable." Amara's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't let them fall. Instead, she kissed her father's forehead and looked at Donovan. "Take care of my dad. He won't admit when he needs help, but he does. Make sure he eats. Make sure he sleeps. And don't let him carry all of this alone." She disappeared back into her bedroom, closing the door softly. Donovan sat down at the table, watching Marcus work with renewed understanding of what was truly at stake here. This wasn't just about money or justice or legal victories. This was about a father trying to give his daughter a future that didn't require the same sacrifices he'd made. They worked until 3 a.m, reviewing every document, preparing for every possible witness, building strategies and backup strategies and contingency plans. When Donovan finally left, driving home through empty streets, Marcus was still awake, still reading, still preparing, still fighting for 2 people's futures at once. The next morning, Donovan arrived at the courthouse at 8:30 to find Marcus already there, wearing a fresh janitor's uniform and looking like he'd maybe slept 2 hours. They had 30 minutes before court resumed, 30 minutes to prepare for whatever Catherine Voss would throw at them in her desperation to recover from yesterday's disaster. They didn't have to wait long to find out. At 8:55, 5 minutes before Judge Rothman would take the bench, Catherine Voss approached the defense table with an expression that was equal parts fury and grim satisfaction. "Mr. Sterling, the prosecution has added a witness to today's list. I wanted to give you courtesy notice." Donovan felt his stomach drop. "Who?" "Richard Caldwell." The name hit like a physical blow. Donovan's former attorney. The man who'd betrayed him. The man who'd been paid $5 million to sabotage his defense. "He's testifying? For the prosecution. He's agreed to testify about certain conversations you had with him during the preparation of your defense. Conversations that indicate consciousness of guilt." Marcus's hand gripped Donovan's arm, steadying him. "What conversations?" "Everything I told Caldwell was protected by attorney-client privilege." Catherine Voss's smile was cold. "Mr. Caldwell is prepared to testify that you confessed your guilt to him privately and discussed plans to flee the country to avoid prosecution. Under those circumstances, attorney-client privilege is waived. The crime-fraud exception applies when a client uses legal counsel to further criminal activity." Donovan felt rage building in his chest, hot and consuming. That's a lie. I never said anything like that. We'll let the jury decide. Voss walked back to her table, and Donovan turned to Marcus with panic rising. He's going to lie under oath. He's going to tell them I confessed to him. The jury will believe a lawyer over me. We're finished. But Marcus was calm. Unnaturally calm. He pulled out his notebook and started writing with that same precise handwriting. Let him talk. Let him tell a story. Let him feel confident and untouchable. Why? Because confident people make mistakes. And Richard Caldwell is about to make the biggest mistake of his life. Court resumed at 9 a.m. sharp, and the gallery was more crowded than yesterday. Word had spread about the janitor who destroyed the prosecution's witnesses, and now attorneys from other cases were packing the benches, curious to see if lightning would strike twice. Judge Rothman took her seat, reviewed her notes, and looked at Catherine Voss. Call your next witness. The prosecution calls Richard Caldwell. The courtroom doors opened, and Caldwell walked in, and Donovan felt his hands clench into fists under the table. The man looked prosperous, well-rested, wearing a suit that probably cost more than Marcus earned in 3 months. He took the oath without hesitation, swearing to tell the truth, and settled into the witness chair like he owned it. Catherine Voss approached with the demeanor of someone who believed she was about to win the war. Mr. Caldwell, what is your profession? I'm a defense attorney with 22 years of experience in criminal law. Were you retained to represent Donovan Sterling in this case? I was. He hired me 6 months ago to defend him against these charges. And during the course of your representation, did Mr. Sterling make any statements to you about his guilt or innocence? Caldwell paused, as if the question pained him, as if he was reluctant to betray a client's confidence. It was performance art, and he was good at it. He did. During a private meeting in my office approximately 3 months ago, Mr. Sterling admitted that he had orchestrated the fraudulent transfers. He asked me to help him create a defense that would cast doubt on the evidence, even though he knew he was guilty. The courtroom exploded in whispers. Jurors leaned forward, shocked. Donovan started to stand, rage overriding reason, but Marcus's hand clamped down on his arm like a vice. Let him talk, Marcus whispered. He's lying. Donovan hissed back. I know, but let him finish. Catherine Voss continued. What else did Mr. Sterling tell you? He expressed concern about being convicted and discussed potential plans to leave the country before sentencing if he was found guilty. He asked me about extradition laws for various countries. He was preparing to flee. Caldwell looked directly at the jury, his expression grave and regretful. I withdrew from the case because I could not in good conscience participate in helping a guilty man escape justice. That's why I left him without representation. It was devastating testimony. Clean. Convincing. Delivered with the authority of someone who'd spent 2 decades in courtrooms. The jury was buying it. Donovan could see it in their faces. The skepticism they developed yesterday was evaporating, replaced by the simple narrative that rich people think they're above the law and try to buy their way out of consequences. Catherine Voss looked satisfied. Thank you, Mr. Caldwell. No further questions. Judge Rothman turned to Donovan. Mr. Sterling, you may cross-examine. This was it, the moment that would either save him or finish him. Donovan stood, but Marcus was already pressing a note into his hand. He read it. Just one line. Ask him about the Cayman Islands account that received $5 million 6 months ago. Donovan's heart was pounding. Mr. Caldwell, you testified that you withdrew from my case because of ethical concerns. Is that accurate? Yes. Not for any other reason? No. You didn't withdraw because you've been paid to betray me? Caldwell's expression hardened. That's a serious accusation, Mr. Sterling. And it's completely false. Is it? Tell me, Mr. Caldwell, do you have any financial accounts in the Cayman Islands? For the first time, Caldwell's composure flickered. Just slightly. I don't see how that's relevant. Answer the question, please. Do you have accounts in the Cayman Islands? I have various investments in different jurisdictions. That's not unusual for someone in my tax bracket. Specifically, do you have an account at Cayman National Bank, account number 447-8392B? The courtroom went absolutely silent. Caldwell's face had gone pale. How do you? He stopped himself, but it was too late. The question had already revealed the answer. Donovan felt Marcus slide a document across the table. A bank statement, slightly crumpled, with highlighted sections showing deposits. Your Honor, I'd like to submit this document as evidence. It's a bank statement for the account I just referenced, showing 2 deposits in the last 6 months. $5 million in October, $2 million last week. The payments originated from a shell company called Langford Industrial Holdings. Catherine Voss shot to her feet. Objection. Where did the defendant obtain confidential banking records? Judge Rothman looked at Donovan. Mr. Sterling, how did you acquire this document? Marcus leaned close and whispered. Tell her I found it in the courthouse trash. 4th floor recycling bin. Tuesday night. Donovan repeated it exactly. My legal advisor found it in the courthouse recycling bin. It had been discarded, making it abandoned property with no expectation of privacy. Perfectly legal discovery. Judge Rothman examined the document. Her expression was thunderous. Mr. Caldwell, is this your bank statement? Caldwell was sweating now. I don't know how that document came to be here, but it was obtained illegally. It was obtained from trash, Judge Rothman said coldly. That's not illegal. Now answer my question. Is this your account? A long, agonizing pause. Then, barely audible, yes. And did you receive $7 million in deposits from a company associated with Victor Langford over the course of representing Mr. Sterling? I can explain. Answer the question. Caldwell's shoulders slumped. Yes. The courtroom erupted, not in whispers this time, but in actual gasps and exclamations. Jurors were staring at Caldwell with expressions of disgust. Catherine Voss looked like she'd been struck. And Victor Langford, sitting in the gallery, was standing up, trying to move toward the exit. Judge Rothman's gavel came down like thunder. Order! Mr. Langford, sit down. Bailiff, if Mr. Langford attempts to leave this courtroom, detain him. The bailiff moved to block the door, and Langford slowly, reluctantly, sat back down. Judge Rothman turned her attention back to Caldwell. Mr. Caldwell, did you receive payment from Victor Langford in exchange for sabotaging your client's defense? Caldwell's voice was barely a whisper. I need to speak with my own attorney. I'm sure you do. Bailiff, please escort Mr. Caldwell into custody. He'll be held pending investigation for perjury, fraud, and conspiracy. The bailiff moved forward, and Richard Caldwell was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs, his expensive suit and polished shoes looking absurd now as he shuffled past the jury box. The same jury he just tried to deceive. Catherine Voss was conferring frantically with her co-counsel. Judge Rothman's voice cut through the chaos. Ms. Voss, approach the bench. Mr. Sterling, you too. They gathered in front of Judge Rothman's bench, and her expression was severe enough to make even Donovan nervous, despite the fact that she was clearly on his side now. Ms. Voss, did you know about Mr. Caldwell's payments from Mr. Langford? The prosecutor looked genuinely shaken. No, Your Honor. I was told he was withdrawing due to irreconcilable differences. I had no knowledge of any financial arrangements. And did you coordinate with him regarding his testimony? He approached us offering to testify. I took his statement. It seemed credible. Judge Rothman's jaw tightened. It seemed credible because he's a lawyer and you wanted to believe him. But due diligence would have revealed these financial connections. This is prosecutorial negligence at best. She turned to Donovan. Mr. Sterling, I'm going to call a recess while I determine how to proceed. This case is falling apart in ways that suggest serious misconduct by multiple parties. I'm also ordering an immediate investigation into Victor Langford's potential involvement in witness tampering and conspiracy to obstruct justice. She looked at the bailiff. Mr. Langford is not to leave this building until I've had an opportunity to question him under oath. Understood. Yes, Your Honor. Judge Rothman dismissed them and called for a 30-minute recess. Donovan walked back to the defense table, feeling like he was floating. Marcus was gathering documents with his usual efficiency, but there was satisfaction in his expression. How did you know? Donovan asked. How did you know about the Cayman account? Marcus looked up. Tuesday night, I was cleaning the 4th floor offices. Caldwell had a small office he used when he was working on cases at the courthouse. He'd been there that day, probably celebrating his final payment. He'd printed the bank statement to verify the transfer had cleared. Then he threw it away, figuring no one would look in a courthouse trash can. But janitors always look. It's how we know everything. Donovan felt something that might have been laughter, or might have been hysteria bubbling up. You built this entire case on evidence you found in trash cans and things you overheard while cleaning. Invisible people see everything, Marcus said simply. And trash tells more truth than most witnesses. They left the courthouse during the recess, needing air and space to process what had just happened. The case wasn't over, but the momentum had shifted so dramatically that Catherine Voss would be insane to continue. And sure enough, 20 minutes into the recess, Donovan's phone rang. It was the prosecutor. "Mr. Sterling, I'd like to discuss a potential resolution to this case." Donovan put her on speaker, so Marcus could hear. "What kind of resolution?" "All charges against you dropped immediately in exchange for your cooperation in the investigation of Victor Langford and Richard Caldwell. Full immunity from prosecution." Marcus was nodding. Donovan felt tears threatening. "I accept. We'll have the paperwork ready when court resumes. And Mr. Sterling, I owe you an apology. I should have looked more carefully at the evidence I was given." The call ended. Donovan looked at Marcus, this janitor who'd saved his life, and didn't trust himself to speak. Marcus just smiled. "Come on. Let's go tell Judge Rothman the good news." They walked back into the courthouse, and as they passed through the metal detectors, Donovan noticed two men in suits standing near the entrance. They didn't look like lawyers. They looked like the kind of men who got paid to intimidate people. One of them made eye contact with Marcus and held it just a second too long. Donovan felt a chill run down his spine. Marcus had noticed too. But they had a case to finish, so they kept walking. Court resumed, and Catherine Voss formally moved to dismiss all charges against Donovan Sterling. Judge Rothman granted it immediately, then spent 10 minutes excoriating the prosecution for not vetting their witnesses and evidence more carefully. Then she turned to Victor Langford. "Mr. Langford, please approach the bench." Langford stood slowly, his confident demeanor completely gone. He walked forward like a man going to his own execution. "Mr. Langford, I'm formally ordering you to surrender your passport and remain in this jurisdiction pending investigation. If you attempt to leave, I will have you arrested. Do you understand?" "Yes, Your Honor." "You're dismissed. For now." Langford walked out, and as he passed the defense table, he looked at Marcus with an expression of pure hatred. Then he was gone. Judge Rothman turned to Donovan. "Mr. Sterling, you're free to go. This ordeal is over." Donovan stood, his legs shaking. "Thank you, Your Honor." "Don't thank me. Thank the man sitting beside you." She looked at Marcus. "Mr. Webb, I meant what I said yesterday. You've demonstrated legal knowledge that exceeds most practicing attorneys. I'd like to recommend you for admission to the bar examination. With my endorsement and your obvious competence, you could be practicing law within 6 months. Marcus's eyes widened. "Your Honor, I don't know what to say." "Say yes. And when you pass the bar, come see me. We need more people like you in this profession." The gavel came down one final time. Donovan walked out of that courtroom a free man, and the gallery erupted in applause. Reporters swarmed them in the hallway, cameras flashing, questions shouted. But Donovan only had eyes for Marcus, who was standing there in his janitor's uniform looking overwhelmed and exhausted and quietly triumphant. "We did it," Donovan said. "You did it. You saved my life." Marcus smiled. "You're going to save my daughter's future. I'd say we're even." They pushed through the crowd and emerged into sunlight. Donovan took a breath of free air and felt tears finally fall. He was free. The nightmare was over. But it wasn't. Not quite. That night, Marcus returned to his apartment at 9 p.m. after spending the day cleaning his regular courthouse routes because he still had a job to do and bills to pay. He was exhausted beyond measure, running on caffeine and adrenaline, and the satisfaction of knowing Amara's Harvard tuition was secured. He climbed the metal stairs to his third-floor apartment, his keys in his hand, thinking about how he was going to tell his daughter that everything they dreamed about was finally possible. And then he saw them. 2 men in suits, the same ones from the courthouse entrance earlier, standing outside his apartment door, waiting. Marcus stopped on the stairs. His heart rate kicked up, but he kept his expression neutral. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" The taller one spoke, his voice calm and professional. "Mr. Webb, we represent Mr. Langford's interests. He asked us to deliver a message. I'm not interested in messages from Victor Langford." "You should be." The second man stepped forward. "Mr. Langford is facing serious charges because of your interference. He's not happy about that. That's unfortunate for him." Marcus moved to walk past them, but the tall one blocked his path. Not touching him, not technically threatening, but making it very clear that this conversation wasn't over. "Mr. Langford wants you to know that he understands you were just trying to help your daughter. He respects that, and he's willing to make you an offer. I don't want his money. It's not about money. It's about safety. Your daughter, Amara, is 16 years old. Smart girl. Pre-law at Harvard next fall. That's a long way from home. A lot can happen to young women in big cities. Accidents. Random crime. Would be terrible if something happened to her." The words were delivered calmly, matter-of-factly, but the threat was crystal clear. Marcus felt rage and fear war inside him in equal measure. "You're threatening my daughter. We're expressing Mr. Langford's concern for her well-being. See, if the investigation into Mr. Langford were to encounter certain obstacles, if certain witnesses were to recant or forget key details, he might feel more generous, more inclined to make sure nothing unfortunate happens to anyone he cares about, including your daughter." Marcus stood there on the metal stairs, keys cutting into his palm where he was gripping them too hard, and faced the decision that would define everything. He could tell these men to go to hell, could report the threat to police, to Judge Rothman, to Donovan, could fight, or he could back down, could prioritize his daughter's safety above everything else, could let Victor Langford escape justice if it meant Amara would be protected. The second man pulled out a business card and tucked it into Marcus's uniform pocket. "Think about it. Mr. Langford doesn't need an answer tonight, but he will need an answer before the investigation proceeds much further. Choose wisely, Mr. Webb." They walked past him, their shoes clicking on the metal stairs as they descended. Marcus stood frozen, his mind racing, his heart pounding, his entire body shaking with suppressed rage and fear. He turned and unlocked his apartment door with trembling hands. Inside, the living room was dark except for the light from Amara's bedroom. He could hear her talking on the phone, probably with a friend, laughing about something. Normal teenage sounds. Innocent. Oblivious to the danger that had just knocked on her door. Marcus walked to the refrigerator, needing water, needing something to ground him. And there on the refrigerator door, held up with magnets, was the Harvard acceptance letter. The future they'd both fought for. The dream that was supposed to save them. His phone rang. "Donovan." "Marcus, I know it's late, but I wanted to thank you again. And I wanted to tell you that I've already set up the trust fund for Amara's tuition. All 4 years. She's covered." Marcus couldn't speak. Donovan continued. "Marcus? Are you there?" Finally, Marcus found his voice. "I'm here. Thank you. That means everything. Is something wrong? You sound strange." Marcus looked at his sleeping daughter's door. Then, at the business card in his pocket with Victor Langford's attorney's number. Then back at the Harvard letter. "Donovan, if I asked you to stop cooperating with the investigation into Langford, would you do it?" Silence on the other end. Then, carefully, "Why would you ask me that? Just answer the question." "No, I wouldn't. That man tried to destroy my life. He's going to prison where he belongs." Another pause. "Marcus, what happened?" Marcus sank into a chair, exhaustion and fear finally overwhelming him. "2 men were waiting at my apartment tonight. They threatened Amara. Said if I helped the investigation against Langford, something might happen to her." Donovan's voice went cold. "Where are you?" "Home." "Stay there. I'm calling my security team. They'll be at your apartment in 15 minutes. And Marcus, you don't negotiate with terrorists. We're going to protect Amara, and we're going to make sure Victor Langford pays for everything he's done, including this. Donovan, I can't risk my daughter. You won't have to. Trust me, just like I trusted you." The call ended. Marcus sat in the dark, staring at the Harvard letter, thinking about the impossible choice between justice and safety, between doing what's right and protecting what matters most. And then Amara's bedroom door opened, and she walked out in her pajamas, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "Dad, why are you sitting in the dark? Did something happen?" Marcus looked at his daughter, This brilliant, innocent girl who deserved a future without fear, without threats, without having to pay for her father's courage. And he made his decision. He wasn't backing down. He wasn't letting Victor Langford win. Because if he taught Amara anything, it should be that you don't surrender to bullies. You fight them, even when you're terrified, even when everything you love is on the line. Nothing happened, baby girl. Just tired. Long day. Amara studied him with those sharp eyes that missed nothing. Dad, are you lying to me? Marcus smiled despite everything. Yeah, but I'll tell you the truth tomorrow, after I take care of something. Now go back to sleep. Big day ahead. She didn't move. Whatever it is, we'll handle it together. Right. She kissed his forehead and went back to her room, and Marcus sat there in the dark, waiting for Donovan's security team, waiting for dawn, waiting for the next battle in a war he thought was over. The case might be won, but the fight for survival had just begun. This is the moment that separates casual viewers from real subscribers. Marcus has to choose between his daughter's safety and justice. And you're watching this unfold without being subscribed to Olivia the Storyteller? That's like reading the best book of your life and then leaving it on a park bench for someone else to finish. Hit that subscribe button right now, or drop a comment telling us you're the kind of person who walks away from stories that matter. Your move. Donovan's security team arrived at Marcus's apartment at 9:43 p.m. 3 professionals who looked like they'd spent their careers protecting people from threats most civilians never had to consider. They swept the building, installed additional locks, set up a monitoring system, and stationed 1 guard outside the apartment door. Marcus barely slept that night, lying awake listening to every sound, every footstep in the hallway, every car door closing in the parking lot. At 6 a.m., he gave up on sleep entirely and called Donovan. The billionaire answered on the first ring, sounding like he hadn't slept either. Marcus's voice was steady when he spoke, steadier than he felt. I'm not stopping. They threatened my daughter, and that was a mistake. But we need protection for Amara. Real protection. The kind that keeps her safe while we finish what we started. Donovan's response was immediate. Already done. I've hired a full security detail. 3 guards in rotation, 24/7 coverage. 1 will accompany her to school, 1 will be stationed at your apartment, and 1 will be mobile. Ex-Secret Service, all of them. The best money can buy. They start today. Marcus felt something in his chest loosen, slightly. That's expensive. So is watching a good man back down because criminals threatened his child. Consider it part of our deal. You save my life. I save your daughter's future. That includes keeping her safe. There was a pause. Then Donovan added quietly, Marcus, you don't have to do this. The case is over. I'm free. You could walk away right now and nobody would blame you. Marcus thought about that for exactly 3 seconds. Then he thought about Amara asking him last night if they'd handle it together. Thought about his mother teaching him that running from bullies only makes them stronger. Thought about 16 years of watching injustice happen in courtrooms while he pushed a mop and stayed invisible. No, Marcus said finally, I've been invisible for too long. They just made it personal, and that was the last mistake they'll ever make. I'm testifying against Langford. I'm giving them everything I know, and I'm making sure he pays for every single thing he's done. By 8 a.m., there was a security guard named Thompson stationed outside Marcus's apartment, a woman in her late 30s with sharp eyes and the kind of calm competence that made you believe she could handle anything. Another guard, Martinez, was already en route to Amara's school to coordinate with campus security. Marcus explained the situation to his daughter over breakfast, watching her face cycle through fear, anger, and finally determination. She was 16, but in that moment, she looked older, wiser. Dad, are you sure about this? Marcus spread peanut butter on toast with hands that weren't quite steady. No, but I'm sure about what happens if I back down. Bad people win. Good people learn to stay quiet. And you grow up thinking that's how the world works. I can't teach you that. Amara reached across the table and took his hand. Then do the right thing. I'm scared, but I'm also proud. You're showing me what courage actually looks like. She paused, then added with a slight smile, Besides, I've got bodyguards now. That's kind of cool. Sarah Mitchell is going to be so jealous. Marcus felt tears threatening and blinked them back. When did you get so brave? I learned from my dad. She squeezed his hand. Now go destroy that billionaire." Marcus laughed despite everything, kissed her forehead, and headed to the courthouse with Thompson, following at a discreet distance. The security was obvious enough to deter threats, but subtle enough not to draw unwanted attention. And as Marcus pushed through the courthouse doors wearing his janitor's uniform one last time before this whole thing changed his life forever, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Not hope exactly. Something fiercer. Righteous anger. Victor Langford had threatened his daughter. And that made this personal in a way the man would come to deeply regret. The courtroom was packed by 9 a.m. when Judge Rothman took the bench. The media had turned this into a spectacle, the story of the janitor taking down a billionaire conspiracy, and reporters from national outlets were crammed into every available seat. Marcus sat beside Donovan at the defense table, and even though all charges against Donovan had been dropped yesterday, they were both here for what came next. The investigation into Victor Langford was moving forward, and Marcus had agreed to provide testimony about everything he'd witnessed, overheard, and discovered during his 15 years of being invisible in this building. But first, they had to sit through Langford's attempt to salvage his reputation. Catherine Voss had resigned from the prosecution yesterday after the disaster with Caldwell, and a new prosecutor named James Chun had taken over. He was older, more experienced, and had a reputation for being ruthless when he caught the scent of corruption. He'd subpoenaed Langford to testify, not as a defendant yet, but as a character witness in what was technically still Donovan's case, even though the charges were dropped. It was a strategic move designed to get Langford on record, under oath, before the criminal investigation officially began. Judge Rothman looked at the new prosecutor. "Mr. Chun, call your witness." The prosecution calls Victor Langford. The courtroom doors opened, and Langford walked in like he was attending a board meeting rather than a hearing that could end with his arrest. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost $10,000, his salt and pepper hair perfectly styled, his expression confident and slightly amused, as if this whole proceeding was beneath him, but he was graciously participating anyway. He took the oath with his hand on the Bible, swearing to tell the truth, and settled into the witness chair with the ease of someone who'd never faced real consequences in his entire life. Marcus watched him and felt his anger crystallize into something cold and focused. This man had built an empire on the backs of other people's work, had destroyed Donovan's life to cover his own crimes, had threatened a 16-year-old girl because her father dared to seek justice, and now he was sitting there looking untouchable, convinced that money and power would save him one more time. Marcus was about to teach him a very expensive lesson about underestimating invisible people. James Chin approached the witness stand with a folder of documents. "Mr. Langford, how long have you known Donovan Sterling?" 35 years. We built Sterling Technologies together. Would you describe him as honest?" Langford paused, as if considering the question carefully. "I would describe him as idealistic, sometimes dangerously so. He often let personal feelings interfere with business decisions." "Can you elaborate?" Donovan was always more concerned with doing what he thought was right, rather than what was profitable. He opposed several business strategies that would have increased shareholder value because he felt they were ethically questionable. It created tension between us. Chen nodded. "Did this tension ever escalate?" "Unfortunately, yes. About 8 months ago, Donovan accused me of various improprieties. He threatened to go public with these accusations, which were baseless, but would have damaged the company's reputation. I believe that's when he began the fraudulent activities he was charged with. He was trying to siphon money before the company collapsed. It was smooth, polished, delivered with just the right mix of regret and concern. Langford painted himself as the reasonable businessman, and Donovan as the unstable idealist who'd cracked under pressure. The jury, even though they'd already acquitted Donovan, was listening intently. And more importantly, the media was eating it up. Every word Langford spoke was being recorded, broadcast, published. He was crafting his public narrative, trying to salvage his reputation, even as the legal walls closed in. "And the evidence against Mr. Sterling?" Chen asked. "The financial records, the emails, the witness testimony, were those legitimate?" "As far as I knew, yes. I was shocked when he was indicted, but the evidence seemed overwhelming." Chen consulted his notes. "You were shocked?" "Of course. He was my friend. My partner. I never wanted to believe he was capable of fraud. Donovan sat beside Marcus, his jaw clenched so tight it looked painful. Marcus touched his arm and whispered, "Let him talk. Every lie he tells gives us more ammunition." Chen continued, "Mr. Langford, did you have any involvement in the evidence presented against Mr. Sterling?" "None whatsoever. I cooperated fully with the investigation, but I didn't provide evidence or testimony." "Did you have any financial relationship with Richard Caldwell, Mr. Sterling's former attorney?" Langford's expression didn't change. "I may have consulted with Mr. Caldwell's firm on unrelated legal matters." "That's not unusual. Did you pay him $7 million? My company's engaged numerous legal firms. I don't personally track every transaction." It was masterful deflection. Never quite lying, but never quite admitting truth either. Chen pressed harder. "Were you aware that Mr. Caldwell received $5 million shortly after agreeing to represent Mr. Sterling?" "I was not aware of Mr. Caldwell's personal finances, but the money came from one of your shell companies. I have numerous subsidiaries and holdings. Transactions occur without my direct knowledge." Judge Rothman interjected. "Mr. Langford, answer the question directly. Did you personally authorize payments to Richard Caldwell?" Langford met her eyes without flinching. "I authorized legal consulting fees. What Mr. Caldwell did with those fees is not my responsibility." Chen looked frustrated, which was exactly what Langford wanted. The man was too smart to confess, too experienced to be trapped by standard questions. He'd been preparing for this testimony for days, probably with a team of lawyers coaching him on how to deflect without technically lying. But what Victor Langford didn't know was that Marcus Webb had spent 15 years learning how to ask questions that couldn't be deflected. And Donovan was about to give him that chance. Chen finished his examination looking unsatisfied, and Judge Rothman turned to Donovan. "Mr. Sterling, do you wish to cross-examine?" Donovan stood. "Yes, Your Honor. But I'd like my legal advisor, Marcus Webb, to assist me directly in questioning." Judge Rothman raised an eyebrow. "Mr. Webb isn't an attorney." "Not yet, but he's the one who uncovered this conspiracy, and he knows the right questions to ask." Langford's expression shifted slightly. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across his face. He was looking at Marcus like he was trying to place him, trying to remember where he'd seen this man in the janitor's uniform before. Judge Rothman considered the request. "Mr. Webb may assist in preparing questions, but Mr. Sterling must be the one to speak." "Understood, Your Honor." Marcus slid his notebook across to Donovan and pointed to the first question. Donovan read it, looked at Marcus with surprise, then looked back at Langford. When he spoke, his voice was steady and sharp. "Victor, when we founded Sterling Technologies 35 years ago, whose idea was it? Whose algorithm formed the basis of our first product?" Langford shifted slightly. "It was a collaborative effort. That's not what I asked. Whose algorithm was it?" A pause. Then, reluctantly, "Yours. But I provided the business acumen to commercialize it. So I created the technology. You marketed it. Fair assessment. Simplified, but essentially yes." Donovan consulted Marcus's next question. "When our company was developing the SX7 software in 2015, who wanted to skip the safety testing phase to meet the release deadline?" Langford's jaw tightened. "We had discussions about timeline optimization. Who wanted to skip safety testing? Market conditions required fast deployment." "Answer the question. Who wanted to skip safety testing?" James Chen stood. "Your Honor, relevance." But Judge Rothman was leaning forward with interest. "I'll allow it. This goes to character and credibility. Answer the question, Mr. Langford." Langford's polished demeanor was cracking around the edges. "I suggested we could release a beta version without full testing." "And what did I say?" "You refused." "Why?" "You claimed it was unsafe. That we had a responsibility to ensure the software wouldn't cause harm." Donovan pulled out a document that Marcus had prepared. "This is an internal memo from 2015. Your memo. In it you write, and I quote, 'Sterling is too cautious. Safety testing is expensive and delays profit. We need to move forward regardless of his concerns.' Do you remember writing that?" Langford's face flushed. "That was taken out of context." "What context makes it acceptable to risk consumer safety for profit? Business requires calculated risks." And who bears the cost when those calculations are wrong? Marcus slid another document across. Donovan read it and felt his anger spike. This is a settlement agreement from 2016. Sterling Technologies paid $12 million to settle a lawsuit after the SX7 software caused a manufacturing plant malfunction that injured 3 workers. A settlement we paid because we released software that wasn't properly tested. A settlement I insisted on paying even though you wanted to fight it in court. Do you remember that? The courtroom was silent. Every eye was on Langford, and his confident facade was evaporating. We settled to avoid prolonged litigation. We settled because we were responsible for those injuries. Because I overruled my own objections and let you push the release forward. Because I compromised my ethics and people got hurt. And I swore I'd never let you make me do that again. Marcus was writing rapidly, feeding Donovan questions with surgical precision. Each one designed to chip away at Langford's credibility, to show the jury and the media and everyone watching that this man was not the victim he claimed to be. Let's talk about money, Victor. If I'd been convicted of fraud and lost control of Sterling Technologies, what would have happened to my shares? They would have been forfeit under criminal forfeiture laws. And who would have acquired those shares? Likely they would have been redistributed to shareholders or sold to cover restitution. Who's the second largest shareholder in Sterling Technologies? Langford's voice was tight. I am. So if my shares were forfeited, you would have become the majority owner. Is that correct? In theory. Not theory. Math. I owned 52%. You owned 31%. The remaining 17% is distributed among minor shareholders. If my 52% was forfeited and redistributed, you would have acquired enough to control the company. Yes or no? Yes. What's the current valuation of Sterling Technologies? Approximately $4.2 billion. Donovan consulted Marcus's notes again. So by destroying me, by having me convicted and removed, you stood to gain majority control of a $4 billion company. That's your motive, isn't it? You framed me because I was going to expose your illegal activities, and you turned my potential whistleblowing into an opportunity to steal everything I'd built. Langford's composure was cracking visibly now. His voice rose. That's speculation. Is it? Let's look at the timeline. In August, I discovered you were engaging in illegal data harvesting, violating privacy laws, and bribing foreign officials for contracts. I confronted you in your office on August 14th. Do you remember that conversation? We had discussions about business practices. I told you I was going to the board of directors. I told you I couldn't be complicit in illegal activity. And what did you say? Langford was sweating now despite the air conditioning. I don't recall the exact words. Let me help you. You said, you'll regret this. Those were your exact words. And 6 days later, the FBI raided my office. Not yours. Mine. How do you explain that timing? Coincidence. Coincidence. Donovan's voice was sharp with sarcasm. It's a coincidence that I threatened to expose you on August 14th, and the FBI raids my office on August 20th with evidence you fabricated through paid witnesses and a corrupt attorney. I didn't fabricate anything. Then explain the $7 million you paid Richard Caldwell. Explain the $200,000 your company paid Ryan Kowalski. Explain the $85,000 that showed up in Gerald Tish's account. Marcus passed Donovan another document, and this one was the killer. Donovan held it up so the courtroom could see. This is a financial analysis prepared by an independent forensic accountant. It shows that if I'd been convicted, you would have gained control of Sterling Technologies. It also shows a disturbing pattern. Over the last 10 years, you've forced out 7 partners or executives who discovered your illegal activities. Every single one of them left under circumstances that benefited you financially. 2 faced trumped-up legal charges. 3 took settlements with non-disclosure agreements. 1 died under suspicious circumstances that was ruled an accident. And 1, me, you tried to send to prison. Do you want to tell this court that's all coincidence, too? The courtroom erupted. Reporters were typing frantically. Jurors were staring at Langford with open shock. And Langford himself was no longer the polished businessman. He was red-faced, furious, cornered. That analysis is biased. It's based on public records, court filings, financial disclosures, all available information. What part of it is biased? The part where you systematically destroyed anyone who threatened to expose your criminal activities, or the part where you profited from every single one of those destructions? Langford shot to his feet, his composure completely gone. You were always weak, Donovan. Always putting ethics above profit. Always acting like business is some kind of charity. Business is business. You make money or you fail. You do what's necessary, or someone else does it first. I built this company as much as you did, and I wasn't going to let your sanctimonious moralizing destroy everything we'd created. The courtroom went dead silent. Even the reporters stopped typing, frozen in shock at what they just witnessed. Victor Langford, the polished billionaire, had just confessed. Maybe not to specific crimes, but to the worldview that justified them. To the belief that ethics didn't matter, that the ends justified the means, that destroying people was just part of business. Judge Rothman's voice cut through the silence like a blade. "Mr. Langford, sit down." Langford realized what he'd said. The color drained from his face. He sank back into the witness chair. James Chen was on his feet. "Your Honor, I move to have Mr. Langford taken into custody pending formal charges." "Objection!" Langford's attorney, who'd been sitting silently in the gallery, rushed forward. "My client hasn't been charged with anything. This is a fishing expedition." Judge Rothman's expression was glacial. "Your client just admitted on the record that he believes destroying people is acceptable business practice. Combined with the financial evidence showing payments to witnesses and attorneys, the pattern of forcing out executives who discovered illegal activities, and the suspicious timing of the FBI raid after Mr. Sterling threatened to expose him, I have sufficient cause to believe crimes were committed. Mr. Langford, you're being detained pending investigation. Bailiff, take him into custody." The courtroom exploded into chaos. Reporters surged toward the exits, racing to file stories. Langford was shouting at his attorney. The bailiff was moving toward the witness stand with handcuffs, and Donovan Sterling stood at the defense table, shaking, tears streaming down his face, watching his former friend and business partner finally face consequences. Marcus touched Donovan's shoulder. "It's over. You won." Donovan turned to him. "We won. You did this. You asked the questions I never would have thought to ask. You saw the connections I was too close to see. You saved my life and destroyed him with nothing but truth." Victor Langford was handcuffed now, being led out of the courtroom. As he passed the defense table, he looked at Marcus with pure hatred. "You're a janitor. You're nobody. How did you—" Marcus met his eyes calmly. "I'm the person you never noticed. And that was your biggest mistake." Langford was escorted out, and Judge Rothman called for order. When the room finally quieted, she looked at James Chen. "Mr. Chen, I'm formally requesting that you investigate Victor Langford for conspiracy, fraud, witness tampering, and any other relevant charges. The evidence presented today suggests a pattern of criminal behavior spanning at least a decade. Already initiated, Your Honor. We'll have charges filed by end of day." She turned to Donovan. "Mr. Sterling, I apologize on behalf of this court that you were subjected to this ordeal. The system failed you, but it also eventually worked, thanks largely to Mr. Webb's persistence and your courage in fighting back." She looked at Marcus. "And Mr. Webb, my offer still stands. Take the bar exam. This profession needs people like you." Marcus nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. The gavel came down. "This court is adjourned." The hallway outside was pandemonium. Media swarmed Donovan with cameras and microphones, shouting questions about Langford, about the conspiracy, about the janitor who'd saved him. Federal marshals were coordinating with courthouse security to transport Langford to detention. Richard Caldwell was being held in a separate facility, and prosecutors were preparing to charge both men with an array of crimes that could result in decades of prison time. Donovan pushed through the crowd with Marcus beside him, security guards clearing a path. They made it to a quiet corridor away from the chaos, and Donovan leaned against the wall, exhausted beyond measure. "It's actually over," he said, almost disbelieving. "The charges are dropped. Langford's arrested. Caldwell's in custody. It's really over." Marcus nodded. "It is. You gave me my life back, my freedom, my reputation, my company. How do I ever repay that?" "You already did. Amara's going to Harvard. That's all the payment I need. Donovan shook his head. No. It's not enough. Not nearly enough. He pulled out his phone and made a call. Sarah? Yes, it's done. Langford's arrested. We won. A pause while he listened. I need you to prepare something for me. I want Marcus Webb hired as Chief Legal Counsel for Sterling Technologies. Starting salary, $350,000 annually. Full benefits. And I want a trust established for his daughter covering all 4 years of Harvard, plus graduate school if she pursues it, plus a stipend for living expenses. Get it done today. He hung up and looked at Marcus. You're not going back to being a janitor. You're going to take the bar exam, and while you're studying, you're going to work for me. When you pass, and you will pass, you'll run the legal division I'm creating. Pro bono defense for people the system failed. People like you. People like me. People who deserve justice but can't afford it. Marcus's eyes widened. Donovan, I can't accept. Yes, you can. Because this isn't charity. This is me recognizing what you're worth and paying you accordingly. You saved my life. Now let me help you build yours. Marcus stood there in the courthouse hallway, still wearing his janitor's uniform, and felt the weight of 16 years of invisible labor finally lifting from his shoulders. He thought about his mother, who died believing he'd sacrificed his dreams for her. He thought about Keisha, who'd left because she didn't think he'd amount to anything. He thought about every night he'd spent reading law books by fluorescent light while cleaning offices, every trial he'd watched from the gallery while invisible, every time someone had looked right through him like he didn't exist. And he thought about Amara, sleeping peacefully last night with bodyguards stationed outside, safe because her father had refused to back down, about to attend Harvard because a billionaire recognized that courage and competence matter more than credentials. I accept, Marcus said finally. On one condition. Name it. Every janitor in this courthouse gets a scholarship fund for their children's education. Full ride to any public university in the state. They see everything. They know everything. They deserve everything. Donovan's face broke into a genuine smile for the first time in months. Done. I'll endow it personally. The Webb Foundation. $1 million initial funding with annual contributions to sustain it. How's that sound? Marcus felt tears threatening. It sounds like justice. They shook hands there in the empty corridor, two men who'd been abandoned by everyone else finding each other at exactly the right moment and changing each other's lives forever. Donovan's phone rang. It was his daughter, Rebecca, calling for the first time in 6 months. His son Michael was calling on the other line. They'd seen the news. They wanted to talk, wanted to apologize, wanted their father back. Donovan looked at the phone and then at Marcus. I should take this. Take it. You've earned it. Donovan walked away to reconnect with his children, leaving Marcus alone in the corridor. And Marcus pulled out his own phone and called Amara. She answered on the first ring. Dad, I saw the news. You did it. You won. Marcus smiled, exhausted and triumphant. We won, baby girl. You and me. We won. When are you coming home? Soon. I just need to change clothes first. I don't think I'll be wearing this janitor's uniform anymore. Why not? Because your dad just became a lawyer. Amara screamed with joy, so loud Marcus had to hold the phone away from his ear. And somewhere in that scream, he heard everything. Pride, relief, hope, victory, the sound of dreams finally coming true. He hung up and stood there in the courthouse that had been his workplace for 15 years, looking at it with new eyes. Tomorrow, he'd walk through these doors as something different. Not invisible, not unnoticed, not just a janitor who knew too much. He'd walk in as Marcus Webb, legal counsel, future attorney, the man who'd taken down a billionaire conspiracy with nothing but truth and persistence and 15 years of invisible observation. But tonight, he was just a father going home to tell his daughter that their lives were about to change in ways they'd only dreamed about. And that was more than enough. 8 chapters in. Marcus just destroyed a billionaire conspiracy. And you still haven't subscribed to Olivia the Storyteller? At this point, you're basically saying I love free content and don't care if the creator gets credit. Is that really you? Or are you going to hit that subscribe button and join the thousands who support real storytelling? If not, drop a comment explaining your reasoning. We're waiting. TikTok. 3 weeks passed between Victor Langford's arrest and his formal sentencing hearing, And those 3 weeks felt like living in a strange, liminal space between the nightmare that had been and the future that was still taking shape. Marcus continued his janitorial work because he had bills to pay and couldn't afford to quit until the bar exam results came through, but now when he walked through the courthouse halls, people recognized him. Attorneys nodded. Judges smiled. Other janitors asked him questions about legal precedents like he was already one of them, already transformed from invisible to essential. Amara had her bodyguards, but the threats never materialized again. Langford was in custody, and whatever power he'd wielded was rapidly evaporating as his empire collapsed under federal investigation. Donovan had moved back into his office at Sterling Technologies and was systematically removing every trace of Langford's influence, firing executives who'd been complicit, restructuring departments, rebuilding trust with employees who'd watched the company nearly self-destruct. And now, on a cold morning in early December, they were all back in courtroom 7B for the final chapter of the story. The sentencing hearing for Victor Langford and Richard Caldwell. The moment when justice would either be served or prove itself to be just another broken promise in a system that too often protected the powerful. The courtroom was packed beyond capacity, with people standing in the back and spilling into the hallway outside. This wasn't just about two men facing consequences. This was about whether the system could actually work when someone without power challenged someone with everything. Marcus sat beside Donovan at what had become their table, no longer the defense table because there was nothing left to defend, but something else now. A symbol. Proof that justice could come from unexpected places if you were brave enough to demand it. Judge Helena Rothman entered at 9 a.m. precisely, and the bailiff's voice rang out. All rise for the Honorable Judge Rothman. Everyone stood. The room fell silent, and Judge Rothman looked out over the packed gallery with an expression that was equal parts satisfaction and barely controlled anger. She'd been presiding over this courthouse for 30 years, and in all that time, she'd never seen anything quite like what had unfolded in her courtroom. The near destruction of an innocent man by forces that should have protected him, and his salvation by someone the system had overlooked for 15 years. She sat, and everyone else followed. Then she began to speak, and her voice carried the weight of 3 decades of watching justice fail and occasionally, miraculously, succeed. This court has witnessed something extraordinary over the past weeks. We've seen the near destruction of an innocent man by those he trusted most. We've seen a conspiracy of corruption involving officers of this court, witnesses who sold their integrity for money, and a business partner who weaponized the legal system to eliminate a threat to his criminal enterprise. We've also seen justice served, but only because of the courage of an unlikely advocate who refused to accept that power always wins. She looked directly at Marcus. Mr. Webb, would you please stand? Marcus stood, his heart hammering. He wasn't sure what was happening, but the entire courtroom was watching him with something that looked like anticipation. Judge Rothman continued, her voice softer now but no less powerful. For 15 years, you've worked in this courthouse. You've cleaned our offices, emptied our trash, and maintained the spaces where justice is supposed to happen. And while you worked, you watched. You learned. You studied. You became, without any of us fully realizing it, one of the most knowledgeable legal minds in this building. When Mr. Sterling needed an advocate and found himself abandoned by the very system meant to protect him, you stepped forward. Not because you were paid, not because you had anything to gain beyond helping your daughter pursue her dreams, but because you understood something fundamental that too many of us forget. Justice isn't about credentials or status. It's about truth and courage and the willingness to fight for what's right even when you're terrified. The gallery was completely silent now. Marcus could hear his own breathing, feel his pulse in his throat. Judge Rothman opened a folder on her bench. Mr. Webb, I've reviewed your law school transcripts from 16 years ago. Top of your class in every subject. A natural talent for legal reasoning that your professors noted repeatedly. You left school 3 months before graduation to care for your dying mother, a sacrifice that speaks to your character more than any degree could. And since then, you've continued your education in these halls, building knowledge that I would argue exceeds what many practicing attorneys possess. She paused, and Marcus saw something in her eyes that might have been respect or might have been recognition of something she'd always known but never acknowledged. The California State Bar has specific requirements for admission to the bar examination. Typically, you must have completed law school and earned your degree. However, there's a provision for exceptional circumstances. With the sponsorship of a sitting judge and demonstration of equivalent knowledge through practical application, the Bar Association can waive certain requirements and allow a candidate to sit for the exam. Marcus felt his knees go weak. He couldn't be hearing this correctly. Judge Rothman smiled slightly. Mr. Webb, I'm formally petitioning the California State Bar Association to allow you to take the bar examination based on your demonstrated legal knowledge, your practical application of that knowledge in this courtroom, and my personal sponsorship. You've already proven you can practice law. Now we just need to make it official. The courtroom erupted in applause. Not polite, restrained courtroom applause, but genuine, thunderous recognition of what this meant. Marcus stood there, unable to speak, unable to move, barely able to breathe. 16 years. 16 years of believing that door was closed forever. 16 years of reading law books in empty courtrooms and telling himself it was just for interest, just to keep his mind sharp, just to pass the time. Never believing he'd actually get the chance to use it. And now Judge Helena Rothman, one of the most respected jurists in the state, was telling him that door wasn't closed. It had just been waiting for him to prove he deserved to walk through it. When Marcus finally found his voice, it cracked. Your Honor, I dropped out 16 years ago. I don't have a degree. You're not just anything, Mr. Webb. Judge Rothman's voice was firm. I've watched you for 15 years. I've seen you reading outside courtrooms when you thought no one noticed. I've seen you take notes on legal proceedings during your breaks. I've seen you help other janitors understand their rights when they faced workplace issues. You've been studying in these halls all along. You've earned this opportunity. She closed the folder. The petition will be filed today. If approved, and I have every reason to believe it will be, you'll be eligible to take the bar exam in February. I suggest you start preparing. Marcus sat down before his legs gave out entirely. Donovan was gripping his shoulder, saying something Marcus couldn't quite hear through the ringing in his ears. The courtroom was still applauding. And somewhere in the back, Marcus knew Amara was watching on the live stream he'd sent her the link to, probably screaming with joy and texting all her friends that her dad was about to become a real attorney. But the proceedings weren't finished. Judge Rothman called for order, and the room gradually quieted. Now came the part everyone had been waiting for. The sentencing. This court will now address the matters of Victor Langford and Richard Caldwell, both of whom have entered guilty pleas to charges of conspiracy to commit fraud, witness tampering, and obstruction of justice in exchange for reduced sentences. Reduced sentences? The phrase made Marcus's stomach twist. Even now, even after everything, wealth and power bought advantages that ordinary people never got. Langford and Caldwell wouldn't face the maximum penalties. They'd negotiated, made deals, found a way to minimize the damage even in defeat. Judge Rothman seemed to read the room's disappointment. I want to be clear that while plea agreements were reached, I am not bound to accept the prosecution's sentencing recommendations. I've reviewed the evidence extensively. I've considered the scope of the conspiracy, the number of lives damaged, and the systematic nature of the corruption. And I've reached my own conclusions about what justice requires. She looked at the prosecution table. Bring in the defendants. The side door opened, and two men in orange jumpsuits were led in by federal marshals. Victor Langford looked like he'd aged a decade in 3 weeks. His perfectly styled hair was unkempt. His confident bearing was gone, replaced by the shuffling posture of someone who'd lost everything and knew more loss was coming. Richard Caldwell looked even worse, his face gaunt, his eyes hollow. The two men who'd conspired to destroy Donovan Sterling now stood before the court in chains, and the symbolism wasn't lost on anyone in the room. Judge Rothman addressed them directly, her voice cold. Victor Langford, you built a criminal enterprise over decades, systematically destroying anyone who threatened to expose your illegal activities. You bribed witnesses, paid off attorneys, and weaponized the legal system to eliminate threats. You attempted to send an innocent man to prison for crimes you orchestrated. And when that conspiracy began to unravel, you threatened the daughter of a man whose only crime was seeking justice. The prosecution has recommended 15 years. I'm sentencing you to 25 years in federal prison, to be served without possibility of parole for the first 10 years. Langford swayed on his feet. His attorney started to object, but Judge Rothman's glare silenced him. Richard Caldwell, you betrayed the most sacred trust in our legal system. You took money to sabotage your own client's defense. You fed confidential information to prosecutors. You actively worked to send an innocent man to prison. You violated every ethical standard of our profession, and you did it for money. The prosecution has recommended 8 years. I'm sentencing you to 15 years in federal prison, with disbarment effective immediately. Caldwell made a sound that might have been a sob. The marshals moved to escort them out, but Judge Rothman wasn't finished. Before you're removed, I want you both to look at the gallery. Look at the people watching this proceeding. Look at the journalists who will report your sentences. Look at Mr. Sterling, the man you tried to destroy. And look at Mr. Webb, the janitor you never noticed, who brought your entire conspiracy crashing down. Remember their faces, because those faces represent something you forgot. Justice doesn't belong to the powerful. It belongs to anyone brave enough to demand it. The marshals led them out, and this time the applause was deafening. People were standing, some cheering, some crying. Donovan had his face in his hands, shoulders shaking with relief or grief or both. And Marcus sat there thinking about how close this had come to going the other way. How easily Langford could have won if Marcus had stayed invisible, if Donovan had faced that courtroom alone, if fear had been stronger than courage. But fear hadn't won, and that mattered more than any sentencing ever could. Judge Rothman called for order one final time. When the room quieted, she made one more announcement. All charges against Donovan Sterling are hereby formally and permanently dismissed with prejudice. Mr. Sterling, you're free to go, and you have this court's sincere apology for what you endured. Donovan stood, tears streaming down his face, and looked at Marcus. We did it. It's actually over. Marcus nodded, unable to speak past the emotion clogging his throat. It was over. The nightmare that had consumed 6 months of Donovan's life and 3 weeks of Marcus's was finally, definitively over. Justice had been served. The guilty were punished. The innocent was free. And 2 men who'd been strangers a month ago had become brothers in the kind of bond that only forms when you fight for survival together. The courtroom emptied slowly, people lingering to talk, to congratulate, to process what they'd witnessed. Marcus and Donovan made their way through the crowd, shaking hands, accepting congratulations, feeling the weight of the last month finally lifting from their shoulders. And then they walked out into the bright California sunshine, where a crowd of reporters and cameras was waiting for them. Donovan had scheduled a press conference, and now, with the sentencing complete and justice served, it was time to talk about the future. Time to turn this ending into a beginning. Donovan stepped up to a microphone that had been set up on the courthouse steps. Cameras from every major news network were pointed at him. Reporters had their recorders raised, and Marcus stood slightly behind him, still in his courthouse janitor uniform because he hadn't had time to change, feeling completely surreal about the fact that this was his life now. Donovan cleared his throat and began to speak, his voice steady and clear. 3 weeks ago, I stood in a courtroom facing the destruction of everything I'd built. I'd been betrayed by my business partner, my attorney, and even my own children. I was about to face trial alone, with no defense, no hope, and no chance of proving my innocence. And then a janitor named Marcus Webb said 4 words that changed both our lives. I will help you. He paused, letting that sink in. Marcus Webb didn't know me. He had no reason to trust me, no reason to risk everything for a stranger. But he'd spent 15 years in this courthouse watching justice fail, and he couldn't stand by and watch it fail again. So he stepped forward. He used knowledge he'd acquired through 15 years of invisible observation. He asked questions no one else thought to ask. He found evidence everyone else had overlooked. And he dismantled a billion-dollar conspiracy with nothing but truth and courage. Donovan turned to look at Marcus. Marcus saved my life, and now I'm going to spend the rest of mine making sure his sacrifice wasn't in vain. He faced the cameras again. I'm announcing today that Sterling Technologies is creating a new division, the Sterling Legal Justice Initiative. Its mission is simple: provide pro bono legal defense to people who've been failed by the system. People who can't afford high-priced attorneys. People who face charges they didn't commit. People who need someone to fight for them, the way Marcus fought for me. We're committing $50 million in initial funding with ongoing annual contributions to sustain the work indefinitely. The reporters were scribbling frantically. Several raised hands to ask questions, but Donovan held up a hand. I'm not finished. This initiative needs a leader. Someone who understands what it means to be overlooked by the system. Someone who has the legal knowledge and the moral courage to fight for justice, even when it's difficult. Someone who's already proven they can take on powerful opponents and win. He turned fully toward Marcus now, and his voice was thick with emotion. Marcus Webb, once you pass the bar examination in February, and you will pass, I'm offering you the position of Chief Legal Counsel for the Sterling Legal Justice Initiative. Starting salary of $350,000 annually, full benefits, and a guarantee that you'll have the resources and support to fight for every single person who needs you. Additionally, I'm personally endowing a trust fund for your daughter Amara that will cover all 4 years of Harvard, plus law school if she chooses to pursue it, plus living expenses and any other educational costs she incurs. The reporters erupted with questions, but Marcus couldn't hear them. He was staring at Donovan, his mind struggling to process what he'd just heard. $350,000. That was more than he'd earned in the last decade combined. More than he'd ever imagined earning. Enough to give Amara not just college, but security, opportunity, a future without the constant fear of bills and debt, and choosing between dreams and survival. Enough to give himself the chance to actually practice law, to use his knowledge to help people, to be what he'd always wanted to be but never thought possible. A reporter shouted a question. Mr. Webb, will you accept the position? Marcus looked out at the sea of cameras and microphones and curious faces. Then he looked past them to where he knew Amara was watching from her school, live streaming this moment on her phone, probably surrounded by friends and teachers who'd heard about the janitor who saved a billionaire. He thought about his mother, who died believing she'd derailed his dreams. He thought about all the times he'd looked at that law degree he never finished and wondered what his life might have been. He thought about Keisha, who'd left because she didn't think he'd amount to anything, and wondered if she was watching this somewhere, realizing exactly what she'd walked away from. He thought about Judge Rothman's words, "You've been studying in these halls all along." He thought about Donovan's outstretched hand offering him not charity but recognition, not pity but partnership. And he thought about 16 years of being invisible, of pushing mops while watching justice happen, of reading law books in empty courtrooms and dreaming of a day that would never come. Except it had come. It was here. Right now. This moment. This choice. Marcus stepped up to the microphone, and his voice didn't shake when he spoke. I accept. On one condition. Donovan looked surprised, but nodded. Name it. Marcus looked directly into the cameras, knowing that what he said next would be recorded, broadcast, remembered. Knowing that he had the power now to make something happen that would outlast both of them. Every janitor in this courthouse gets a scholarship fund for their children's education. Full ride to any public university in the state. They see everything. They know everything. They deserve everything. If you want me to lead this initiative, if you want me to fight for justice, then you start by recognizing that justice begins with the people everyone overlooks. The people who clean your offices and empty your trash and make your buildings function while you walk past them like they're invisible. Those people matter. Their children matter. And if we're going to build something that actually changes the system, we start by acknowledging that knowledge and worth aren't determined by job titles or income brackets. The reporters had gone silent, cameras still rolling but the usual shouting of questions suspended as everyone processed what Marcus had just demanded. It wasn't a small request. It wasn't symbolic. A scholarship fund for every janitor's child. That was hundreds of people, millions of dollars, a commitment that would last decades. It was audacious. It was unprecedented. It was exactly the kind of thing someone who'd spent 15 years being invisible might demand when they finally had the power to change things. Donovan didn't hesitate. He extended his hand toward Marcus, and his voice carried across the courthouse steps. Done. I'll endow it personally. The Webb Foundation for Educational Justice. $2 million initial funding, with annual contributions to sustain it indefinitely. Every janitor in this courthouse, and every janitor in every building Sterling Technologies operates, will have access to full scholarships for their children. You have my word. Marcus took Donovan's hand, and they shook in front of dozens of cameras, hundreds of witnesses, with the weight of two families' futures and countless others' hopes resting on that handshake. And in that moment, something shifted in the air. Not just for them, but for everyone watching who'd ever been overlooked, underestimated, told they didn't matter because of what they did for a living or how much money they made. Because Marcus Webb, courthouse janitor, had just negotiated from a position of power, had just demanded recognition for invisible people, had just proven that worth isn't measured in credentials, but in courage, not in status, but in what you're willing to fight for. The reporters found their voices again, shouting questions. Mr. Webb, when did you start studying law? Mr. Sterling, how does it feel to be vindicated? What message does this send about the justice system? But before either of them could answer, there was a commotion at the edge of the crowd. People were parting, making way for someone pushing through. And then Amara Webb burst into view, running up the courthouse steps with her backpack still slung over her shoulder and tears streaming down her face. She'd left school the moment the sentencing ended, had taken a bus across the city, had run 6 blocks because she couldn't wait, couldn't stay away, needed to be here for this moment. Dad! She threw herself into Marcus's arms, and he caught her, lifting her off her feet like he used to when she was little. She was 16 now, too old for this, but neither of them cared. Dad, Harvard, and you're going to be a real lawyer, and we're not going to be poor anymore. And you did it, Dad. You actually did it. Marcus was crying now, couldn't stop, didn't want to. Baby girl, I've always been a real lawyer. I just needed someone to see it. Amara pulled back, her hands on his face, her expression fierce with pride. Everyone sees it now, Dad. Everyone. You're a hero. I'm not a hero. I'm just a father who loves his daughter and a man who couldn't stand by and watch injustice happen. That's what a hero is, Dad. That's exactly what a hero is. The cameras captured it all. The embrace, the tears, the moment of pure joy between a father and daughter who'd fought so hard for so long and finally had proof that the fight was worth it. And watching them, Donovan felt something crack open in his chest. His own children, Rebecca and Michael, weren't here. They'd sent emails apologizing, explaining that they'd been misled, asking for forgiveness. But they hadn't shown up, hadn't stood beside him on these steps, hadn't celebrated his vindication in person. They'd chosen money over loyalty, and even though he understood the manipulation they'd faced, even though he was working toward forgiveness, the absence hurt in a way he hadn't expected. But he had Marcus, and Amara, and the knowledge that family isn't always blood. Sometimes it's the people who show up when everyone else walks away. Sometimes it's the janitor who risks everything to save a stranger. Sometimes it's the daughter who runs 6 blocks because she can't wait to celebrate her father's triumph. Sometimes family is what you build from courage and trust and shared survival. A reporter called out one more question as the press conference wound down. Mr. Webb, last question. What would you say to someone who's been told they'll never amount to anything? Someone who's working a job they're overqualified for? Someone who's given up on their dreams? Marcus looked at the camera, at the lens that would carry his words to millions of people watching this story unfold. He thought about everyone who'd ever cleaned an office, worked a job that didn't use their education, sacrificed their dreams for their children, been invisible in spaces where important things happened. And he spoke directly to them. I'd say this: your job doesn't define your worth. Your credentials don't determine your intelligence. Your circumstances don't dictate your future. If I've learned anything in the last month, it's that the system will overlook you, underestimate you, and ignore you. But that doesn't mean you're powerless. It means you see things others don't. You know things others miss. And when the moment comes, when someone needs help, and you have the knowledge to provide it, you step forward. You risk everything. You fight. Because invisibility isn't weakness. It's preparation. And someday, when you're ready, you stop being invisible and you change everything. He paused, then added with a slight smile, also, never throw away important documents if there's a janitor nearby. We read everything. The crowd laughed, the tension breaking into something lighter, warmer. And as the press conference ended and people began to disperse, Marcus stood on those courthouse steps with his daughter in his arms and his future stretched out before him like a road he'd been walking toward his entire life without knowing it. He'd started this journey as a janitor who read law books in empty courtrooms. He'd become the man who saved a billionaire and dismantled a conspiracy. And he was about to become an attorney, a leader of a justice initiative, a father whose daughter would attend Harvard without debt or fear or the constant calculation of whether dreams were affordable. But more than any of that, he'd become proof that the system could be challenged, that power could be questioned, that invisible people mattered just as much as anyone else. And that proof would outlast the headlines, outlast the trials, outlast even his own lifetime. Because somewhere, right now, someone else was working a job they were overqualified for, dreaming of something better, wondering if they'd ever get the chance to be more than what circumstances had made them. And they'd hear about Marcus Webb. They'd see that courthouse janitor who became an attorney, who challenged a billionaire, who demanded recognition for invisible people. And they'd think, if he could do it, maybe I can too. Maybe I'm not as powerless as I thought. Maybe being overlooked just means I'm seeing things others miss. Maybe invisibility is preparation, not defeat. And maybe, when my moment comes, I'll be ready. That was the legacy. Not the money or the titles or the headlines. The hope that courage could come from anywhere, that justice belonged to everyone, that invisible people could change the world if they were brave enough to try. Marcus Webb had proven it, and nothing would ever be the same. We're at the climax. Marcus just went from janitor to attorney to be. Amara gets Harvard. Justice won. And you still haven't subscribed to Olivia the Storyteller? Seriously? What's it going to take? Do we need to personally call you? Leave a comment right now explaining why you've watched 9 chapters of a story and still haven't clicked subscribe. Or better yet, just subscribe and save us all the suspense. 1 chapter left. Don't miss it. 6 months feels like both a lifetime and no time at all when you're living between who you were and who you're becoming. For Marcus Webb, those 6 months were filled with studying that made his law school years look like practice runs, 12-hour days of reviewing case law and constitutional principles and procedural rules while still working his janitor shifts because he couldn't afford to quit until he knew for certain that the future Donovan had promised was actually going to materialize. The bar exam was scheduled for the last week of February, a 3-day marathon of testing that would determine whether Marcus would spend the rest of his life as a legal counsel or remain a janitor with dreams that never quite materialized. He prepared obsessively, using every spare moment to study, filling notebooks with practice questions and memorize precedents. Amara had helped him create flashcards, had tested him every night over dinner, had been his cheerleader and taskmaster in equal measure. And now, on a cold March morning, Marcus stood outside the California State Bar Testing Center holding an envelope that contained his results, and his hands were shaking so badly he couldn't bring himself to open it. Amara stood beside him, her own hands shoved in the pockets of her Harvard hoodie that she wore like armor, like proof that dreams could come true even when circumstances suggested otherwise. She'd been home on spring break specifically for this moment, had refused to let her father face this alone, had insisted on being there whether the news was good or devastating. "Dad, you're going to give yourself a heart attack. Just open it." Marcus stared at the envelope like it might explode. Inside was either validation of everything he'd worked toward for 16 years or confirmation that he'd been fooling himself all along, that a janitor who dropped out of law school didn't get to become an attorney no matter how hard he studied or how many billionaires he saved. What if I didn't pass? The question came out quieter than he intended. Amara took his hand, and her grip was fierce. "Then you take it again in July. And if you don't pass in July, you take it again in February. And you keep taking it until you do pass, because you're Marcus Webb and you don't give up on anything. But Dad, you passed. I know you did. You know more about law than half the attorneys who took that exam. So open the envelope and let's celebrate." Marcus took a breath that didn't quite fill his lungs and tore open the envelope with trembling fingers. The letter inside was formal, official, stamped with the California State Bar seal. He scanned the text, his eyes jumping over words until they landed on the only sentence that mattered. "Congratulations. You have successfully passed the California bar examination." And then in smaller text below, "Score, 98th percentile." Marcus's knees went weak. 98th percentile. He hadn't just passed. He dominated, had scored higher than 98% of the people who took the exam, most of whom had traditional law degrees and hadn't spent the last 16 years pushing mops. Amara was reading over his shoulder, and she screamed so loud that people walking past on the sidewalk stopped and stared. Dad, 98th percentile. You're not just a lawyer, you're a genius lawyer. She threw her arms around him, and they stood there on the sidewalk, holding each other while Marcus cried tears he'd been holding back for 16 years. Tears for his mother who died believing he'd sacrificed his dreams. Tears for every night he'd spent reading law books in empty courtrooms, wondering if it mattered. Tears for the man he used to be and the man he was about to become. His phone rang. Judge Rothman. Mr. Webb, I just received notification of your results. Congratulations. The swearing-in ceremony is scheduled for Friday at 2 p.m. in courtroom 7B. I'll be administering the oath personally. And Marcus, I'm proud of you. You earned this. Friday came too fast and not fast enough. Marcus woke up at 5 a.m., even though the ceremony wasn't until afternoon, too nervous to sleep, too excited to stay still. He showered, shaved, put on the new suit Donovan had insisted on buying him because you don't get sworn in as an attorney wearing a janitor's uniform. The suit was charcoal gray, perfectly tailored, probably cost more than Marcus used to make in a month. He looked at himself in the bathroom mirror and barely recognized the man staring back. Not because of the suit, though that helped, but because of the expression on his face. Confidence, purpose, the look of someone who knew exactly who they were and what they were capable of. Amara knocked on the bathroom door. Dad, you've been in there for 20 minutes. The ceremony starts in 3 hours. We need to eat breakfast. They ate together in relative silence, both too nervous to talk much. Then they drove to the courthouse, the building where Marcus had spent 15 years being invisible, and walked through doors that felt different now. He wasn't entering as a janitor. He was entering as an attorney about to be sworn in. Courtroom 7B was packed when they arrived. Donovan was there in the front row, along with his children Rebecca and Michael, who'd spent the last 6 months rebuilding their relationship with their father through family therapy and genuine remorse. Judge Rothman was at the bench, wearing her formal robes, looking more stern and dignified than Marcus had ever seen her. And filling the gallery, wearing their navy blue uniforms with pride, were 47 courthouse janitors who'd requested time off specifically to attend the ceremony. Their message was clear. One of their own was ascending, and they were here to witness it. Marcus walked to the front of the courtroom with Amara beside him, and Judge Rothman smiled down at them with genuine warmth. Marcus Webb, please raise your right hand. Marcus did, his hand steady now, his voice clear when he repeated the oath. I solemnly swear that I will support the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of California, and that I will faithfully discharge the duties of an attorney and counselor at law to the best of my knowledge and ability. As an officer of the court, I will strive to conduct myself at all times with dignity, courtesy, and integrity. Judge Rothman's gavel came down once. By the power vested in me by the State of California, I declare you Marcus Webb, attorney at law. Congratulations, counselor. The courtroom erupted in applause. The janitors were on their feet cheering. Amara was crying. Donovan was clapping, so hard his hands had to hurt. And Marcus stood there feeling the weight of 16 years of invisible labor finally transform into visible recognition. He'd done it, against every odd, despite every obstacle, through sheer determination and accumulated knowledge and one moment of courage that changed everything. He'd done it. Judge Rothman wasn't finished. She looked out at the gallery and spoke with that commanding voice that made everyone pay attention. I want to say something about what we've witnessed here today. Marcus Webb spent 15 years working in this courthouse as a janitor while educating himself in law. He was overlooked, underestimated, and invisible to most of us. But he never stopped learning, never stopped believing that knowledge mattered, even if credentials were out of reach. And when the moment came, when an innocent man needed help and the entire system had failed him, Marcus stepped forward. He proved that justice doesn't require a traditional path. It requires courage, knowledge, and the willingness to fight for what's right. She paused, letting that sink in. This courthouse, this system, is better because Marcus refused to stay invisible. And I hope that everyone here, especially the custodial staff who make this building function every single day, understands that your work matters, your knowledge matters, and your potential matters. Marcus Webb is proof that extraordinary things can come from people who are too often overlooked. Let his story inspire all of us to see the people around us more clearly and to never underestimate what they're capable of achieving. More applause. Marcus looked back at the janitors in the gallery and saw himself in every face. People working jobs they were overqualified for because circumstances demanded it. People sacrificing dreams for stability. People being invisible in spaces where important things happened. And now, because of what Marcus had done, because of how his story had spread through local news and social media and word of mouth, those people had proof that invisibility wasn't permanent. That knowledge accumulated in the margins could become power when the moment was right. That janitors could become attorneys, and the system that overlooked them could be forced to recognize their worth. The ceremony ended, and people swarmed Marcus with congratulations and questions and requests for photos. But the person he was looking for was the young woman standing at the back of the gallery, wearing a courthouse janitor uniform and holding a legal pad covered in notes. Her name was Jennifer Torres, and Marcus had noticed her 6 months ago starting to do exactly what he used to do. Reading law books during breaks, taking notes on trials, studying while invisible. He'd left encouraging notes for her, had recommended books, had anonymously paid for her to take an online paralegal course. And now, watching her watch him get sworn in, Marcus knew exactly what he was going to do next. But that would come later. First, he had a job to start. Monday morning, Marcus walked into the offices of the Sterling Legal Justice Division for his first day as chief legal counsel, and the space took his breath away. Located on the 20th floor of a downtown building with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, the office was modern and professional and filled with the energy of people who believed their work mattered. A mission statement was engraved on the wall in letters that caught the light. Justice delayed is justice denied. Justice inaccessible is justice destroyed. We exist to fight for those the system overlooks. Donovan met him at the entrance, grinning like a proud father. Welcome to your new home, counselor. Let me give you the tour. There were 12 attorneys already working here, all hired in the last 4 months, all committed to pro bono defense work. There were paralegals and administrative staff, and a library of legal resources that made Marcus's eyes widen. And at the end of a hallway, overlooking the city with morning light streaming through the windows, was an office with Marcus's name on the door. Marcus Webb, Esquire, Chief Legal Counsel. He walked in slowly, taking in every detail. The desk was solid wood, expensive but not ostentatious. The bookshelves were already filled with legal texts he'd specified. The computer was top of the line. And on the desk, in a simple frame, was a photograph that made Marcus's throat tighten. 3 images arranged in a collage. His mother, young and smiling from before the cancer. Amara, age 16, wearing her Harvard acceptance-like armor. And Marcus himself, wearing his janitor's uniform, mopping the courthouse floor. The caption below read, "Never forget where you came from. Never stop fighting for where you're going." Donovan stood in the doorway watching him. "I had that made. Thought you might want a reminder." Marcus couldn't speak, could only nod. Donovan continued, "Your first client is waiting in conference room B. Single mother, facing eviction. Landlord claiming she violated lease terms, but she says she was retaliated against for reporting building code violations. Pro bono case. Exactly the kind of thing we built this division to handle. Think you're ready." Marcus looked at the photo one more time. Then he straightened his tie, picked up a legal pad, and walked out of his office with purpose in every step. Conference room B had windows overlooking the street below. Inside, a woman in her 30s sat nervously at the table, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. She had the look of someone who'd been fighting the system alone for too long and was running out of hope. Marcus walked in, and she stood immediately. "Are you Mr. Webb?" "The attorney." "I am." "Please sit down. Tell me what's happening," she explained in a rush of words. The apartment where she'd lived for 5 years. The broken heat and water damage, and mold that the landlord refused to fix. Her complaints to the city, which resulted in code violations being issued. The eviction notice that arrived 3 days later claiming she'd been noisy and disruptive, which was a lie, which was obviously retaliation, but she couldn't prove it, and she couldn't afford an attorney, and she was going to lose her home, and her 2 kids were going to end up in a shelter. She finished and looked at Marcus with desperate hope. "Can you help me?" "Everyone else said my case wasn't worth their time because I can't pay." Marcus opened his legal pad and started taking notes. And when he looked up at her, his voice was steady and certain and carried the weight of 16 years of invisible observation and accumulated knowledge, and one moment of courage that had changed everything. "I will help you." 4 words. The same 4 words he'd said to Donovan Sterling 6 months ago. The words that had started all of this. The woman's eyes filled with tears. "Really? You'll take my case? Not just take it. We're going to win it. Your landlord violated retaliation laws. I'm going to file an emergency motion to halt the eviction. Then we're going to sue for damages and force repairs to your apartment. By the time we're finished, you'll be safe in your home, and he'll be paying penalties for trying to intimidate you. That's a promise." She started crying in earnest then, relief overwhelming her. "Thank you. Thank you so much. I don't know how to repay you." Marcus thought about his mother, who couldn't repay the nurses who cared for her. Thought about Amara, who couldn't repay him for raising her alone. Thought about every person who'd ever needed help and couldn't afford it. "You don't have to repay me. You just have to fight. And I'll fight with you. That's how this works." He spent the next 6 hours working on her case, drafting motions with precision that came from 15 years of reading legal briefs and watching attorneys work. By end of day, he'd filed emergency paperwork that would halt the eviction pending a hearing. The woman left his office looking lighter than when she'd arrived, and Marcus sat at his desk feeling something he hadn't felt in years. Purpose. Not just making money or paying bills or surviving. Actually making a difference in someone's life using the knowledge he'd spent 16 years accumulating. Across the city, in a building that still bore his name but was being transformed from the inside out, Donovan Sterling sat in his office working through the systematic changes he'd implemented since regaining control of Sterling Technologies. Langford's name had been scrubbed from every document, every building plaque, every piece of company history. The unethical practices Langford had championed were being rooted out and replaced with policies that prioritized integrity over profit margins. It was expensive. Some shareholders complained. But Donovan didn't care about shareholder complaints anymore. He'd learned the hard way what happened when you prioritized profit over principles, and he wasn't making that mistake again. His children, Rebecca and Michael, were slowly rebuilding trust with him through family therapy and genuine efforts to understand how they'd been manipulated. It was slow work. Forgiveness didn't happen overnight, but they were trying, and that meant something. On the wall behind Donovan's desk hung a photograph of the courthouse steps from 6 months ago. The moment Marcus had accepted the position, had demanded scholarships for Janitor's children, had proven that courage could come from anywhere. Donovan looked at that photo every day as a reminder of what mattered. Not money, not power, not prestige. The courage to do what's right even when it costs you everything. The Webb Foundation for Educational Justice was already changing lives. 47 janitors' children had received scholarship applications. 18 had been accepted to universities with full funding. The others were younger, still in elementary or middle school, but they knew now that college wasn't an impossible dream. It was a guarantee if they worked hard. One of those scholarship recipients was preparing to start at UC Berkeley in the fall. Another was attending community college while working toward a nursing degree. A third had been accepted to Stanford's engineering program. Each one of them represented a family that wouldn't have to choose between education and survival. Each one of them was proof that Marcus Webb's courage had ripple effects that would last generations. Meanwhile, 3,000 miles away at Harvard University, Amara Webb was thriving in ways that justified every sacrifice Marcus had ever made. She'd finished her first semester with a 4.0 GPA, had already been accepted into a pre-law mentor program, and was working with an organization that helped first-generation college students navigate the social and academic challenges of elite universities. She'd written an essay for the Harvard Crimson about her father titled "The Janitor Who Became My Hero," and it had gone viral. Millions of people read about Marcus's journey, about the sacrifices he made, about the courage he showed when it mattered most. The essay ended with words that made Marcus cry when he read them. My father taught me that worth isn't determined by job titles or income or credentials. It's determined by what you do when someone needs help and you have the knowledge to provide it. He taught me that being invisible just means you see things others miss. And he taught me that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's choosing to fight even when you're terrified. I'm at Harvard today because my father spent 16 years being invisible so I could be seen. And I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure his sacrifice meant something. Amara called Marcus every Sunday without fail, and their conversations were filled with stories about classes and friends and plans for the future. She'd started dating someone, a kind engineering student who treated her well and understood the weight of what her father had done. She was happy, genuinely, deeply happy, and that happiness was worth more to Marcus than any salary or title or recognition. 6 months became 8 became 10. Marcus won his first case. The single mother kept her apartment, and the landlord paid $50,000 in damages. Then, he won his second case, a wrongful termination suit against a company that had fired a worker for reporting safety violations. Then his third, a criminal defense case where a young man had been charged with assault in a situation that was clearly self-defense. Each victory proved that the Sterling Legal Justice Division wasn't just a publicity stunt or a vanity project. It was a functioning organization doing real work that actually helped people. And then, on a warm afternoon in September, Marcus found himself walking through the courthouse where he'd spent 15 years being invisible. He just won a major case, a class action suit against a predatory lender that had targeted low-income families with loans they couldn't afford. The settlement would return $3 million to victims and shut down the company's operations. Marcus was riding high on victory, thinking about how he'd call Amara and share the news, when he saw something that made him stop in his tracks. A young woman in a janitor's uniform, maybe 25 years old, was mopping the floor outside courtroom 3C. And on her cleaning cart, tucked beside the bottles of cleaning solution and rolls of paper towels, was a stack of law books. Constitutional law, criminal procedure, evidence rules. Exactly the books Marcus used to read in the same hallway 15 years ago. The woman looked up and saw him staring. Her eyes widened in recognition. "You're Marcus Webb. Oh my God, you're Marcus Webb." Marcus walked over, smiling. "I am. What's your name?" "Jennifer Torres. I've been working here for 3 years. You're my inspiration. When I heard your story about how you studied law while working as a janitor and then became an attorney, I thought maybe I could do it too. I've been taking online classes. I'm 2 years into a paralegal program. I want to take the bar exam someday like you did." Her words came out in a rush, excitement and nervousness mixed together. Marcus looked at the law books on her cart, at the highlighted pages and the notes in the margins, and saw himself so clearly it was almost painful. This was who he used to be. This was the invisible person studying in the margins, believing that knowledge mattered even if nobody noticed. "Are you studying for the bar exam?" he asked, though he knew the answer. Jennifer nodded eagerly. "I'm trying, but it's hard. I work full shifts here, then I have my classes, and I'm saving money for when I can finally afford to take time off to really prepare. It's going to take years." Marcus pulled out his wallet and extracted a business card. "Marcus Webb, Esquire, Chief Legal Counsel, Sterling Legal Justice Division." He handed it to her, and her hands shook when she took it. "When you're ready, come see me. We're always looking for passionate people who understand what it means to be overlooked by the system. If you can pass the paralegal certification, we'll hire you. You'll get a real salary, benefits, and time to study for the bar exam. And when you pass, notice I said when, not if, we'll promote you to attorney." Jennifer stared at the card like it was made of gold. "You're serious? You'd hire me?" "I'm completely serious. The world needs more people like you. People who see what others ignore. People who accumulate knowledge in the margins. People who refuse to accept that their circumstances define their potential." He reached into his briefcase and pulled out another document. "An application for the Webb Foundation Scholarship. And this is for your kids. If you have any now or in the future, they'll get full scholarships to any public university in California. That's guaranteed. You won't have to choose between your education and theirs. You can have both." Jennifer's eyes filled with tears. She looked at the business card, at the scholarship application, at Marcus standing there in his expensive suit offering her the same chance someone had offered him. "Why are you doing this? You don't know me." Marcus thought about Judge Rothman telling him he'd earned his chance. Thought about Donovan offering him a job that changed his life. Thought about every person who'd ever been invisible and underestimated and overlooked. "Because someone helped me when I needed it. And now it's my turn to help you. That's how this works. We lift each other up. We recognize potential even when the system doesn't. We refuse to let invisible people stay invisible." He paused, then added, "And because the day I stopped being invisible, I made a promise that I'd never forget what it felt like. I'd never walk past someone the way people walked past me. I'd see them, all of them, especially the ones everyone else ignores." Jennifer clutched the business card and the scholarship application like they were lifelines. Which, in a way, they were. Marcus gave her his direct phone number, told her to call any time she had questions about the bar exam or needed advice about her studies, and then he walked away feeling like he'd just completed a circle that started 16 years ago when he first put on a janitor's uniform and started reading law books in empty courtrooms. The sun was setting as Marcus drove home, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that reminded him of the evening Donovan had offered him that job, that handshake on the courthouse steps that changed everything. He thought about his mother, wished she could see what her son had become. Thought about Keisha, wondered if she'd heard about his story and regretted walking away. Thought about every person who'd ever looked through him like he didn't exist, and realized that their blindness had been his advantage all along. Because invisible people see things others miss. Invisible people accumulate knowledge without anyone noticing. And when the moment comes, when someone needs help and you have the knowledge to provide it, invisibility transforms into power. That was the lesson Marcus had learned. That was the legacy he was building. Not just for himself or Amara or even Jennifer Torres. For every person who'd ever been told they weren't good enough, smart enough, credentialed enough. For every parent working multiple jobs to give their kids opportunities they never had. For every dreamer who'd been forced to defer their dreams because circumstances demanded survival over aspiration. Marcus Webb, former courthouse janitor, current chief legal counsel of the Sterling Legal Justice Division, attorney at law who'd scored in the 98th percentile on the bar exam, had proven something fundamental. The system could be challenged. Power could be questioned. Invisible people mattered just as much as anyone else. And sometimes, if you were brave enough, if you accumulated enough knowledge, if you refused to accept that your circumstances defined your potential, you could change everything. For words had started this journey. "I will help you." For words that Marcus had said to Donovan Sterling when everyone else walked away. For words that had destroyed $1 billion conspiracy, saved an innocent man, and transformed a janitor into an attorney. For words that would echo through courtrooms and law offices and courthouses for years to come, inspiring other invisible people to step forward when the moment was right. Because that's what justice looks like when it actually works. Not judges in robes or attorneys with fancy degrees. Just ordinary people with extraordinary courage choosing to fight for what's right even when they're terrified. Just janitors who refuse to stay invisible. Just fathers who sacrifice everything for their daughters' futures. Just humans who understand that knowledge without action is worthless, but action guided by knowledge can change the world. Marcus pulled into the parking lot of his apartment building, not the old one with the broken security gate, but a new place in a better neighborhood with actual safety and working appliances and no men in suits waiting to threaten his daughter. He walked up 2 flights of stairs instead of 3, unlocked a door that opened to a space twice the size of his old apartment, and found Amara sitting at the kitchen table working on an essay for her constitutional law class. She looked up and smiled. "Hey, Dad, how'd the case go?" "We won. $3 million settlement. Shut down a predatory lending operation." Amara jumped up and hugged him. "That's amazing. How many people did you help?" "About 400 families. 400 families." She said it slowly, letting the number sink in. "Dad, that's 400 families who have their money back, who can pay their bills, who don't have to choose between rent and food. That's because of you." Marcus hugged his daughter tight, this brilliant young woman who was everything good he'd ever done in his life, and felt the weight of 16 years of invisible labor finally transform into something that mattered beyond himself. It's because someone gave me a chance when I needed it, and now I get to do the same for other people. That's the whole point, baby girl. We don't climb the ladder and then pull it up behind us. We climb it, and then we build more ladders for everyone else. Amara pulled back and looked at him with those sharp eyes that missed nothing. You met another janitor today, didn't you? You gave them your business card and the scholarship application. Marcus laughed. How do you know? Because that's who you are. That's who you've always been. You see invisible people because you remember what it felt like to be invisible. And you can't help yourself from helping them. She paused, then added quietly, That's why I'm proud of you, Dad. Not because you became an attorney, or won cases, or made money. Because you remembered where you came from, and you're using your success to lift other people up. That's what heroes do. Marcus felt tears threatening again. Seemed like he cried more now than he had in his entire life before this, but they were good tears. Healing tears. The tears of someone who'd fought for something and actually won. I'm not a hero, Amara. Yes, you are. You're my hero. And you're Jennifer Torres's hero. And you're going to be the hero of every person you help for the rest of your career. So get used to it. They made dinner together that night. A new routine they developed now that they could afford better groceries and had time to actually cook instead of surviving on whatever was fastest and cheapest. They talked about Amara's classes, about Marcus's cases, about the future that stretched ahead of them bright with possibility. And later, after Amara went to bed, Marcus sat in his living room looking at the framed photograph on the wall. The one from his office. His mother, Amara, and himself in the janitor uniform. Never forget where you came from. Never stop fighting for where you're going. He thought about the courthouse, about Jennifer Torres mopping floors while studying law books. Thought about 47 janitors' children receiving scholarships. Thought about 400 families who'd gotten their money back from predatory lenders. Thought about every case he'd won, every client he'd helped, every person who'd walked into his office desperate and walked out with hope. This was the legacy, not the money or the title or the recognition, though those were nice. The legacy was the proof that courage could come from anywhere, that invisible people could change the world, that the system could be challenged by someone with nothing but knowledge and determination and the willingness to step forward when it mattered most. Marcus Webb had been invisible for 15 years. And then, for one moment, when it counted most, he'd chosen to be seen. And that choice had changed everything. For himself. For Amara. For Donovan. For Jennifer Torres. For 400 families. For every person who'd heard his story and thought maybe, just maybe, they could do something impossible too. That was worth 16 years of invisible labor. That was worth every sacrifice, every setback, every moment of doubt. Because in the end, Marcus hadn't just become an attorney. He'd proven that janitors mattered, that invisible people had power, that knowledge accumulated in the margins could transform into justice when the moment was right. And somewhere right now, someone else was reading law books while pushing him up. Someone else was studying during breaks while everyone walked past like they didn't exist. Someone else was accumulating knowledge and waiting for their moment. And when that moment came, they'd remember Marcus Webb. They'd remember that a courthouse janitor became an attorney, challenged a billionaire conspiracy, and won. They'd remember that invisible people can change everything. And they'd step forward. They'd say those 4 words that change lives. I will help you. Because that's how legacies work. Not through monuments or history books or fame. Through the quiet accumulation of courage, passed from one person to another, from one generation to the next, from invisible people who refuse to stay invisible to the ones who come after them. Marcus Webb had started something that would outlast him. And that was more than enough. You just witnessed Marcus Webb go from invisible janitor to legal legend. You saw Donovan Sterling lose everything and gain something better. You watched justice prevail against impossible odds. And now I have one question. Are you subscribed to Olivia the Storyteller, or did you just take this entire journey without leaving a single trace? Here's what happens if you don't subscribe right now. You'll forget this channel's name. You'll remember the story but not where you found it. You'll try to share it with a friend and realize you can't find it. And worst of all, you'll miss the next story, and trust me, tomorrow's story is even more devastating, more triumphant, more unforgettable than this one. So here's your final choice. Hit that subscribe button and become part of a community that values real stories about real courage. Or scroll away and spend the next week trying to remember that Storyteller channel with the Janitor story. And if you still won't subscribe after everything you just experienced, drop a comment telling me why. Tell me what would make you subscribe. Tell me if you think storytellers don't deserve support. Tell me something, because silence is just another form of walking away. This is Olivia the Storyteller, and I'll be here tomorrow with another story that will wreck you, rebuild you, and remind you why stories matter. Will you be here too? That's up to you.